Chapter 1037. There were nearly 5,000 names, and it would take some time to recite all of them. Even though Yang Er's speed was not slow, it still took him 4 hours. During this time, there was no other sound outside the city except for the sound of the wind. Everyone was listening attentively, as if every name that was called out was imprinted in their hearts. When the last name was read out, in front of everyone, Yang Chendong raised his right hand and said loudly, "Invading without a reason, a life for a life. Today, these people are sentenced to death and will be executed immediately. Guards kill. More than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division shouted in unison. Kill. Nearly 800 black cavalry soldiers shouted in unison. Kill. 10,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division shouted in unison. Kill. More than 200,000 people on the city gate tower shouted in unison. The sound of killing shook the heavens, and nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners trembled in fear. Some of the more timid ones could no longer stand and fell to the ground. Under the sound of killing, 454 Siamese soldiers were executed. Their mouths were gagged in advance, so when they died, they did not make a single sound. No one knew if they had admitted their mistake at this moment, or if they wanted to continue cursing. But these were no longer important. What was important was that they were dead and could no longer pose any threat to the 5-star army. Since ancient times, many people had said that killing prisoners of war was an ominous thing. But this time, when Yang Chendong ordered the prisoners to be killed, no one made a different sound. Firstly, they were not prisoners at all. They were just enemies who had temporarily lost their ability to fight. Secondly, the souls of the 5th Division, especially the Black Cavalry, had to be avenged. These people should have died on the battlefield long ago. It was not a bad thing to make use of them. The machete fell, and 4,054 heads fell to the ground. Nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners had completely lost their will to fight. At this moment, they suddenly understood how precious life was and how lucky they were. With the deaths of these people, the 5-star army became even more famous. Everyone saw the attitude of the 5-star army towards the dead. It was said that not only the direct troops of the 5-star army, but also the Cambodian soldiers who died in the battle and the civilians of Suing City who participated in the resistance against the enemy received a handsome pension. It was said that Bugnam of Gojoseon had promised that the families of these martyrs would be given jobs. In other words, he was not only responsible for the dead, but also for the living. As soon as the news came out, the number of people who signed up to join the army in Cambodia increased by several times. Many young men were still complaining that the appearance of the 5-star army had broken the peace of their lives. However, when they saw the attitude of Yang Chendong towards the civilians of Suing City, their mentality changed. They realized that Bugnam of Gojoseon really treated them as his own people. He was really working hard for them to have a better life in the future. On top of this, there was only one more condition, which was to respect the Han people. So what? When did ordinary people have the final say? When did they ever enjoy real freedom? There was only one more Han Chinese above them. As long as they acknowledged this point, they would be able to live a better life and obtain more freedom. So why not? No one liked being born inferior. However, when the general trend was like this, there was nothing they could do to change it. In such an environment, being a soldier to defend the country could give them a new hope. They even had the opportunity to raise their status and bring glory to their ancestors. So, what reason did they have not to do it? In fact, as early as the moment the Phnom Penh dynasty became the province of Cambodia, some policies about Xianxia had been spread. However, most people did not believe it. Today, Yang Chendong used facts to teach everyone a lesson. This kind of doubtful thoughts finally disappeared, allowing more people to see the difference between the 5-star army and making more people envious. There were also more people who launched practical actions and began to sign up for enlistment. Ding Ding Wei and En told the good news to Yang Chendong. Then they looked forward to it. They were happy about the change in the people's views. Although they were former officials of the Phnom Penh dynasty, they could still see who treated the people better. Yang Chendong really wanted to let the people under his rule live a happier life. With this, they should support him. The reason why they looked forward to it was because they were worried that Yang Chendong would not allow these ambitious young people to join the army. After all, the 5-star army paid attention to the elite route. It had always been the quality of the soldiers rather than the quantity. It was also possible to refuse these people to join the army. However, this would greatly reduce their enthusiasm, which would increase the difficulty of managing them in the future. Under their expectant gazes, Yang Chendong pondered for a moment before giving his answer. Since they are so hot-blooded, how can we hurt their hearts? Then let's arrange for an assessment. If the conditions permit, and if there are no problems with identity and background, they can join the army. Yang Chendong actually agreed, which naturally made Ding Ding Wei and De En happy. But then there was another problem. De En quickly said, "Sixth young master, this time there are many people who signed up for the army. Not only Suing City, but many young people of the right age in many towns nearby. If they pass the assessment and political review, can they all join the army?" Of course. Yang Chendong did not understand what Den meant. On the other hand, Ding Ding Wei quickly said, "Sixth young master, it's like this. This time, there are a lot of people, and there should be a lot of people who pass the assessment. If they all join the army, then the military strength of Cambodia will naturally increase by several times, so the financial pressure will naturally be great. It doesn't matter. As long as they are physically qualified and willing, we can accept them. But we have to explain to them in advance that Cambodia alone does not need so many soldiers. They will have a new place to go in the future. As long as we are prepared, we can accept as many as we want." In this battle, Yang Chendong saw the drawbacks of insufficient military strength. Although he had this feeling before with the elite route, even if the enemy had a large number of soldiers, what could they do? They would still be defeated by him. But this time, in the face of the sudden attack of the Siamese army, the lack of military strength was finally revealed. Yang Chendong finally understood that sometimes, it was not enough to have a good number of soldiers. It was the truth that ants could kill an elephant. A small country like Siam gave him so much pressure. If he wanted to conquer the West in the future and occupy a larger area of land, how could he do it without enough military strength? If that was the case, he would just recruit soldiers. Other forces could support so many soldiers, so how could Yang Xia not be able to do it? Out of consideration for the future, Yang Chendong agreed to the expansion of the military. Not only that, but he also sent a message to several other provinces. He knew very well that it wouldn't take long for the news of Cambodia province's recruitment to spread out. By then, the men from other provinces would inevitably ask for such a request. Instead of waiting for them to ask for instructions, it was better to just let it go. He wanted to see how many soldiers he could gather with his forces. Just like that, the matter of conscription was settled. As usual, he only sent a telegram to the Crimson City Lord Manor and the military to state the facts. This clearly showed his attitude. "I'm only informing you, not asking for your opinion. Just do as you're told." The recruitment was handed over to Ding Ding Wei and Dagan, who were familiar with the local environment. In Suing City, Yang Chendong received Lu Zhua, the commander of the new 1st Cavalry Division, who had just arrived. Yang Chendong did not have to be polite to this old subordinate. After learning that Lu Zhua's condition was stable and there were no symptoms of acclimatization, he said, "Since there is no problem with the army, then go and prepare. We will set off in 2 days. It is time to seek justice from Siam." The king of Siam was in Bangkok. General Tong had already fled in defeat. However, he had already lost his freedom the moment he entered the royal capital. He was captured by the king's guards who had been waiting here for a long time and locked up in prison. This time, Siam King Ili Chi believed Tong's words. He sent an army to reinforce the eastern front. He even sent out the few cannons he had. However, in the end, he did not manage to capture Yang Chendong, but the news of the army's defeat. Since the matter had failed, someone had to take responsibility for it. Tong naturally became the culprit. For this matter, Ilikui found Prime Minister Hammond and personally announced his decision to behead Tong Si. According to him, if a general lost a battle, he had to be punished, especially when the 5-star army's counterattack was imminent. If he did not deal with Tong, the other generals would not do their best. In the end, they would lose the battle and flee back to the capital. Hamad had a different view on the king's order. From his point of view, when the two armies were at war, it was not auspicious to kill one's general. It would only disappoint the other generals. But since it was the king's order, he had to obey. Therefore, he arranged for someone to go to the dungeon and announce that Tong would be locked up and executed after the battle. From his point of view, since it had to be done, it was best to delay it as much as possible and not let the bad news spread. Tong, who was only one step away from success, was locked up in the dungeon and waiting to be executed after the battle. If he had known this would happen, it would be hard to say if he would have escaped back to the royal city. What Tong didn't expect was that even though he was about to die, the 5-star army didn't let him off. He fainted after consuming a meal, and when he opened his eyes, he was already out of the dungeon. He couldn't believe that someone would spend a huge sum of money to buy him out of the dungeon. Chapter 1038. The person said that he was General Tong's family, and they were willing to exchange him for someone of similar stature. He was just a dying man. When the prison guards saw the large amount of gold and silver, he handed him over without much thought. After all, he was going to die anyway, so no one would pay attention to him. However, they did not know that this was the beginning of the disaster for Siam. Everything started with Yang Chendong's telegram reprimanding the intelligence department. The Siamese army split into two groups and marched towards Cambodia to intimidate Laos. The 5-star army actually didn't notice such an important military intelligence. It was no wonder that Yang Chendong scolded Yang San in the telegram for being useless. If he couldn't do it, then he should find someone capable to do it. Feeling Yang Chendong's anger, Yang San sent a secret telegram to Golden Rooster, who was in charge of the situation in Southeast Asia. However, this telegram was like a stone thrown into the sea. Helplessly, they had to send someone to investigate. Finally, they received news that Wu Ge, who was temporarily in charge of Sky Sparrow, had been captured by the Siamese army. He was nicknamed Golden Rooster, and his real name was Wu Ge. Just like the Great Ming Dynasty had the Genie Guards and the East Faction Guards, and the 5-star army had the Ministry of State Security and the CIA, Siam also had its own intelligence organization, and they had found Wu Ge's location in advance. It was in an inconspicuous courtyard in Bangkok. Siam beat them at their own game. They did not take him down immediately. Instead, under the instructions of Prime Minister Hamad, they only watched him and did not alert the enemy. When the Siam army was preparing for war, Wu Ge, nicknamed Golden Rooster, was gathering his subordinates for a meeting. The Siam army broke in and captured him. They killed 7 members of the intelligence department on the spot, including Golden Rooster. Because the matter was done secretly, and the key members of the intelligence department who knew about Golden Rooster's whereabouts were either dead or captured, the security department did not know about this at all. It was not until Yang Chendong's telegram that they could not contact him that they sent someone to investigate. Only then did they know everything. The intelligence network of the Ministry of State Security in Siam was wiped out. When the news reached Chichen City, 5th Madam Su Maner, who was in charge of the CIA, felt that her opportunity had arrived. Since the establishment of the CIA, although it had done some things, its contributions were not very great. The reason was that the intelligence network of the Security Bureau had been established long ago. At this time, it was not easy for the CIA to insert a rod into it. Not only did they have to face the obstruction of enemy intelligence departments, but they also had to be suppressed by the Ministry of State Security. That's right, it was true that Su Maner was Yang Chendong's 5th madam, but Yang San was a servant who had followed Yang Chendong for many years. He was extremely trusted and valued. When it came to intelligence, he was naturally unwilling to give in. For the sake of the 5th madam, he had already shown enough respect by not directly suppressing the CIA. It was very difficult for the CIA, which was established late and had lost the initiative, to gain any achievements. As the person behind the scenes, Su Maner had been looking for an opportunity to make a breakthrough. Finally, the opportunity had come. The incident in Siam made her feel that there was an opportunity to take advantage of. Immediately, she sent out a very clean female intelligence member, nicknamed Xianxia, to secretly go to the capital of Siam. According to Su Mun'er's intention, Xianxia's arrival was to investigate more of the Siam army's movements, as well as whether or not she could analyze their next move. After Xianxia arrived, she learned that General Tong had returned to the capital through buying information with a large sum of money. As such, she immediately bribed someone to be a spy in the prison, wanting to keep an eye on this General Tong. Xianxia had a feeling that the sixth young master would not spare this person. Then, his every move had to be carefully monitored. What she did not expect was that the king of Siam was so decisive and actually gave the order to execute him after the war. Since there was no chance to kill this person on the battlefield, Xianxia had the idea that she could not let him go. Thus, she spent a large sum of money to exchange him in the name of Tong's family. After taking down Tong in this way, Xianxia reported the matter. In her opinion, it was just a trivial matter. However, she did not expect that this telegram would be sent to Yang Chendong. The original intention was for Su Mun'er to ask how she wanted to punish the culprit. In Yang Chendong's eyes, his eyes could not help but light up. You must hide him well. If it is not safe, kill him on the spot. In short, do not leave any traces behind. Try your best to deny this matter to the outside world. I have great use for it. After sending this telegram, Yang Chendong immediately sent another telegram to Luo Pe, the commander of the Second Army, who had already made preparations to send out troops in Wanxiang City. He allowed him to send out troops to Siam and reminded him that all logistical matters could be handled by the governor of Lao Province, Luan Shaochen. After sending out these two telegrams, Yang Chendong's third telegram was also sent out. It was sent to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chichen City, Ma Dali. He requested to send people to Siam as soon as possible to negotiate. After sending out the telegram, Yang Chendong waved his hand and sent out troops to Siam. He had the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the New Army, half of the 5th Division of the Lu Army, and a total of 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, temporarily recruited. In total, he had more than 70,000 people. It was quite a powerful force. Next, it was time for him to seek justice. Wanxiang City. After receiving the telegram, the commander of the Second Army, Luo Pe, took the initiative to look for Luan Shaochen and Longtime. He said that he would immediately send out troops according to the 6th young master's orders and asked them to help and cooperate with him. Whether it was Luan Shaochen or Longtime, they were both relatives of Yang Chendong. In addition, one of them was the leader of Laos, while the other was in charge of the stability of the public security under Yang Chendong's influence. Both of them were very powerful. Even though Luo Pe was already a major general, he still showed a lot of respect when he saw them. Commander Luo, don't worry. Lao Province will definitely listen to the orders of the 6th young master. We will fully support you. If you want money, we will give you money. If you want things, we will give you things. This was Luan Xiaochen's declaration. Then came Long Tianan's voice. Commander Luo, don't worry. I have already discussed with General He Guang. We will try our best to keep up with your pace. During this period, we have recruited a total of 40,000 soldiers. We will fully support you. After more than 10 days, while the situation in Suing City was worrying, Luan Shaochen and Longtime did not stay idle. After they reached a common goal, they did something very bold without being able to contact Yang Chendong. That was to recruit soldiers on the spot, especially the police force. Under Long Tianan's request, many people joined the army and became members of the Lao army. This allowed the army to expand in a short period of time and reached a total of 40,000 people. It was also proven that their thoughts were the same as Yang Chendong's. As expected, Cambodia province started to expand the army. However, Lao province's actions were done before this order. Because of this, Luan Shaochen and Longtime jointly signed a telegram to Yang Chendong to ask for forgiveness. Not only was military power important, it was also very sensitive. It was like a double-edged sword. If used well, it could be used to kill the enemy. If not, it would hurt oneself. Knowing this, the two of them had to show some attitude. Of course, Yang Chendong also had to show some attitude. He ended the telegram by telling them not to do it again. This was also a reminder to some people that privately recruiting and dispatching troops was not allowed. This warning was a warning that it would not happen again. After receiving support, Commander Luo Pa finally let loose. Other than the 7th Division who remained in Vietnam to stabilize the situation, the 2nd Division and the 6th Division moved out. They suddenly left Wanxiang City and charged towards the Siamese camp outside the city. Following behind these two divisions were the 40,000 newly recruited Lao Lao army soldiers. They were made up of young and strong Lao Lao army soldiers who had yet to get used to each other. At this point, the North, South and East 5-star armies started to retaliate against Siam. On the north was the 2nd and 6th divisions led by Luo Pa, as well as the 40,000 Lao soldiers, a total of 67,000 men. On the east was the 1st Cavalry Division led by Yang Chendong, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, half of the 5th Division and 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, a total of 74,000 men. On the south was the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st C Division. They had a total of 17,000 soldiers. Among them, C's 2nd Division, Zhao Changchao, had already captured Pearl Island, later known as Phuket Island, cutting off Siam's southern road by land. After C's 1st Division occupied Samui Island, they used the water to enter the land and surrounded Pattaya, later known as Tabaya, which was southeast of Bangkok, forming complete control over the entire southern Sea of Siam. When the North Army left Wanxiang City, they caught the Siam Army off guard. Over the past few days, the Siam Army had gotten used to the 5-star Army's defense and did not expect them to suddenly attack. The 20,000 unprepared Siam Army was crippled by the 2nd and 6th Divisions of the Lu Army. Amidst the sounds of gunfire, they were defeated. In less than an hour, they left behind 3,000 corpses and fled. Luo Pajuan left the task of cleaning up the battlefield to the 40,000 Lao soldiers led by Long Tainan and General He Guang. Then, he continued to lead the 2 army divisions to Wulong City, an important city in the north of Siam. At this moment, Siam's General Godin was in the city. He had just heard the news of the 5-star Army's attack. Not long after, he saw his soldiers being defeated. He also saw the 5-star Army soldiers in green chasing after his soldiers. The intelligence personnel had already reported the information. Every 5-star Army soldier who could wear a formal suit belonged to the elite faction. They were not easy to deal with. Although Godin had 200,000 soldiers, he did not dare to be careless. He immediately ordered his men to prepare to defend the city. Cannons, bows, rocks, and kerosene were all prepared. For the sake of safety, he didn't even have the slightest intention of letting the 10,000 defeated soldiers outside the city into the city. Chapter 1039. If they didn't open the gates, they would only lose 10,000 soldiers. Once they opened the gates, the main force would be in danger. With the city's defense and the 50 cannons, they might be able to inflict heavy damage to the main force of the 5-star Army. General Gordon was ambitious. This time, he wanted to use his actions to humiliate the 5-star Army. He wanted to tell them that the Siamese Army wasn't like the Tsang Lan Army or the Phnom Penh Army. They were capable of fighting. While Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city, the 5-star Corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city so that he could destroy one of them with his cannons. The 5-star Corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Looking down from above, Gordon saw that the 5-star Army stopped moving when they were 5 miles away. He didn't understand what they were up to. He didn't have to wait for long before reality told him the truth. Luo Pa ordered the cannons to open fire. The mortar cannons could fire up to 13 li away. Using Wulong City, which was only 5 li away, as a target, it was as easy as playing a game. A total of 40 cannons rained down on the city walls, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Gordon, who was waiting for the enemy to approach, didn't expect the enemy to open fire from such a distance. His cannons could only fire up to a distance of 1,000 meters. This caused him to subconsciously limit his vision. Then, amidst the explosions, he was knocked to the ground by the shockwave. Fortunately, the soldiers beside him were very diligent. They pushed General Gordon to the ground. With one dead, one heavily injured, and two lightly injured, Gordon was safe and sound. He only lost his hearing temporarily. Not only Gordon, the Siamese soldiers on the city tower also lost their hearing. Other than the buzzing sound, they couldn't hear anything from the outside world. After a round of bombardment, the 2nd and 6th Divisions started to charge forward. To the cold front warriors who had to train at least 3 to 5 kilometers a day, a distance of 2,500 meters was nothing. Under the cover of the artillery, they arrived at the city gate that had already been destroyed. After a round of gunfire, they opened up a path and easily killed their way into the city. On the tower, the 50 cannons that had been transported to the North Tower had been reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Beside him, there were almost 1,000 dead bodies of the Siamese soldiers. The other survivors, including General Gordon, had already fled downstairs. In other words, it wasn't that they were useless. It was that their opponents were too strong. Facing the 2nd and 6th Division, who were fully equipped with firearms, the Siamese soldiers were caught off guard. They didn't even know much about them. Thus, they suffered a great loss in the first battle. The 200,000 soldiers of the Siamese army retreated like fish in the sea. It could be said that human potential was infinite. With the mentality of saving their lives, the Siamese soldiers retreated so quickly that the 5-star army couldn't catch up to them. Except for a few who managed to catch up, the main force of the Siamese army fled south. After the victory of the first battle, they killed and captured 30,000 Siamese soldiers. Wulong City was handed over to the Laotian army. After a simple rest, Luo Yin led the 2 divisions and continued south. The news of the defeat on the northern battlefield quickly spread back to Manga City. In the palace hall, King Li Qi showed an expression of disbelief and asked a very idiotic question in front of all the civil and military officials. What is the 5-star army doing? Are they going to destroy Siam like they did to Lansong and Golden Rim? Proud people would always magnify their own strengths for no reason, but at the same time, they would also magnify their enemies' weaknesses. In Eliqui's eyes, Siam was the strongest army in the world. Perhaps it was a little weaker than the 5-star army, but they had their own strengths. How could they be bullied so easily? Eliqui's shout attracted a lot of discussion in the palace. Then, Prime Minister Hamad stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the 5-star army is coming. Looking at the fate of Lansong and Golden Rim, we must be prepared for a war." Sure, let's fight. Who's afraid? Siam had just entered the era of big cities. In comparison, its politics were clean and the people were loyal. Its strength was not weak. This was also where Eliqui's foundation lay. Before the war, Eliqui had found Hamad and a few other important officials. After a discussion, they agreed that the 5-star army was not strong enough to destroy Siam. In other words, even if they lost the war, they could just lower their heads and give some compensation. The possibility of the country being destroyed was still very small. It was because of this point that Eliqui agreed to send troops. He wanted to take the 5-star army by surprise and reshuffle the cards in Southeast Asia. Now it seemed that it did play a role in the early stages. They even surrounded Yang Chendong. At that time, victory was so close. Unfortunately, Tong Si did not take advantage of this opportunity. In the end, he missed out on victory. Since they could not win, they had to think about how to stay in an invincible position. Considering the plan prepared before the war, Prime Minister Hamad continued, "Your Majesty, I request to send a message to the 5-star army to negotiate. Please allow it." Approved. Eliqui had to nod and agree. Unless he was prepared to fight to the death with the 5-star army, he could only negotiate and use this method to quell the flames of war. Under the cold consent of King Eliqui, the royal capital Bangkok once again gathered 200,000 troops to prepare for war. They were ready to support the various battlefields at any time. At the same time, they also sent a message to the 5-star army to express their intention to negotiate. The so-called peace talks were often the result of fighting. Fighting and fighting, fighting and fighting, Everything came to a conclusion. In the end, it was a happy scene for everyone. After the Siam army lost the upper hand, the news of peace talks came. The commander of the East Army, Yang Chendong, who was leading the army to Siam, laughed after hearing the news. All of this was within his expectations. He even sent a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in advance and asked them to send people over. Peace talks? They killed so many of our brothers. Now that our reinforcements are here, they are afraid? They want peace talks? How can there be such a good thing in the world? Beta Persei muttered to express his anger. Beta Persei's opinion made Yang Chendong speechless. In this battle, more than 200 black cavalry soldiers and more than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division died. It was a heavy loss. But in comparison, what benefits did the Siam army gain? The number of people captured and killed had exceeded 120,000. This was already a 30-fold loss ratio. At this moment, the king of Siam was the one suffering, not him. But then again, the lives of the 5-star army soldiers were very important. How could it be compared to the Siam army? From this point of view, Beta Persei's words were not wrong. That's right. It's impossible to talk about peace and let this matter slide. This time, we are determined to get Siam. Yang Chendong's attitude was very firm. Beta Persei's eyes lit up when he heard this. However, Yang Chendong's next words made Beta Persei a little confused. But based on the information we have, Siam prepared a full 800,000 soldiers before this battle. So far, we have destroyed about 200,000 soldiers. There are at least 600,000 soldiers left. Beta Persei, tell me, with our current strength, can we defeat them? Yes, 600,000 is. Beta Persei stopped mid-sentence. This was 600,000, not 60,000. The total number of soldiers of the 5-star armies, even if the average D-ping were to be included, they would only have around 150 to 160,000 men. Even if they wanted to destroy the enemy, they still had to split up their forces to defend the cities that they had occupied. Beta Persei did not speak, and Yang Chendong did not intend to ask any more questions. Instead, he looked thoughtfully in the direction of Siam. A bold plan was formed in his mind again. This plan could be expressed in a very simple way. There were only 4 words: training troops on the battlefield. Soldiers who had never been on the battlefield could not be considered real warriors. This was true for ordinary soldiers. After a few battles, Yang Chendong had already seen his disadvantage. That was, he had too few troops. If he was so weak to deal with the Siam army, wouldn't he be in the same predicament if he was forced to fight against a bigger force in the future? For the future, he also needed to prepare for military training. How could he create a decent army in a short period of time? Their strength could not be said to be on par with the Cold Front, but at least they had to meet the requirements of a B-level army. After thinking about it, the only good idea was to train troops on the battlefield. With the 600,000 soldiers of Siam as a whetstone, Yang Chendong wanted to see how many B-level troops he could train. In order to achieve this goal, more local battles were needed. That was to say, how to fight the Siamese army continuously and make them send out their troops without getting angry became the most important thing. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the best way was to talk while fighting. That was why he was so optimistic and hopeful about the upcoming negotiations between the two sides. Before Yang Chendong had to wait too long, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came. It was their minister, Ma Dali. Yang Chendong was somewhat surprised by Ma Dali's personal visit. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who stayed in Chichen City to preside over the overall situation. How could he come out so easily? Seeing the obvious doubt in Yang Chendong's eyes, Ma Dali smiled bitterly and said, "Sixth young master, for the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the most important thing is the war with Siam, so I came in person." Chapter 1040. Hearing Ma Dali's sincere answer, Yang Chendong smiled. Diplomatic work was usually divided into 3 types: enemies, friends, and countries, regions, or forces in the middle. However, Yang Xie rarely had any hostile forces around him. In the end, It was because of their military and financial strength. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. If Yang Chendong were to add another sentence, it would be to strengthen the diplomacy of the strong. Yes, whether it was a strong military or economic power, diplomatic work was relatively easier. Whether it was because of the desire for benefits or the fear of military power, no one was willing to provoke a strong country or force. Therefore, compared to the heavy work of other departments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was much more relaxed. Finally, there was a strong country like Siam, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally had a chance to show its strength. As the minister, Ma Dali simply volunteered to be here. Since the previous minister, Yang Shan, stepped down because of his son, Yang Taiju, Ma Dali had not achieved any outstanding results. Without any achievements, how could he convince the masses? Even when Yu Qian, as the city lord of Crimson City, held meetings with the status of Prime Minister Yang, Ma Dali rarely spoke. He had been looking for an opportunity to show his strength. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he let it go? After knowing Ma Dali's thoughts, Yang Chendong did not make any comments. A subordinate who wanted to achieve results should not be discouraged. On the contrary, he should encourage him. Minister Ma, you have come this time. Whether you can defeat Siam or even win this war completely depends on your diplomatic skills. As long as you can hold them back, the longer the time, the greater the chance of victory. What do you think? Are you confident? Yang Chendong was telling him the truth. Ma Dali took this opportunity to ask carefully, "Sixth young master, have you made up your mind? Do you really want to defeat Siam in one go?" Ma Dali was like a poisonous needle that was inserted into the enemy's heart. Yang Chendong naturally had no intention of hiding it from him. "That's right. I've already made my decision." But Ma Dali hesitated for a moment. When he saw Yang Chendong's encouraging eyes, he continued, "But according to our investigation, Siam has just become a big city. Whether it is military, political, or economic, they are not weak. It will be difficult to take them down in one go." Difficult? It's like a spring. If you're strong, it's weak. Yang Chendong didn't care if the other party knew what a spring was, or if he could understand this saying. He still said decisively, if a person wants to grow, he has to go through some setbacks and difficulties. Similarly, if Yang Xia wants to expand, it has to do something that it knows is difficult. As long as it overcomes these difficulties, it will become stronger. Understood? Since Yang Chendong had already made up his mind, Ma Dali knew that there was no room for negotiation. He said, "Sixth young master, tell me, what do you want me to do next? What do I have to do?" It's actually not complicated. You just have to do this and that will do." No one knew what Yang Chendong and Ma Dali talked about, but they only knew that early the next morning, Ma Dali had set up a carriage and led a delegation of more than 100 people, representing the interests of the Yang faction, straight to Manga City. It was inevitable that some of the military officers couldn't understand the departure of the peace negotiators. Especially the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining. In the battle on the Barren Mountain, half of his division had died. This was a grudge that must be avenged. Why would they suddenly enter into a state of peace negotiations? Lu Zhua, the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, was also puzzled. He had traveled thousands of miles, taking a boat and rushing day and night. He hadn't even fought a single battle, and now they were going to negotiate? Then what was the point of him bringing the 1st Cavalry Division here? In the main tent, whether it was Xiao Yining or Lu Zhua, after Yang Chendong said that they could say anything and ask anything, the two of them took the lead to speak, expressing the puzzlement in the hearts of their subordinates. In response to their questions, Yang Chendong only replied, "Who said we're not going to fight?" Just this one sentence confused the two commanders. Xiao Yining reacted a little faster. "But didn't we already send people to negotiate with Siam?" "That's right." Lu Zhua quickly added, "Who said that we can't continue fighting if we're negotiating? It doesn't matter. They can talk, we'll fight." Yang Chendong waved his hand casually again, as if they had all misunderstood. In response to Yang Chendong's answer, not only the two commanders, but also the other commanders in the main tent were confused. Even the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, was puzzled. He also didn't understand what the 6th young master was going to do. But is it hard to understand? The young master meant that the war and peace negotiations can be carried out at the same time. However, when we fight, we don't have to send our main force to the front like before. Instead, we can send our reserve troops to the front. We can use this opportunity to see if there are any suitable seedlings. Yang Chendong saw that everyone was confused, so he simply explained it clearly. As soon as he said this, a few people were the first to understand. Especially Commander Tian Hu. Where did his 1st Cavalry Division come from? Wasn't it formed by constantly fighting on the battlefield and gathering elites? This was going to continue the old path. Naturally, he had the most right to speak. He immediately said, "The 6th young master means to train the soldiers through war? That's what I mean. Of course, as veterans who have experienced hundreds of battles, this time, you have to do your job as instructors. Not only that, once you find a good seedling, you can apply for recruitment. The young master will give you a certain amount of talent support. Of course, you have to do your job as instructors and examiners. You have to score every soldier in the war. This is an extremely important matter. Do you understand?" When he said these words, Yang Chendong especially looked at the commander of the 5th Cavalry Division, Xiao Yining. The meaning he wanted to express was very clear. Isn't the 5th Cavalry Division lacking in soldiers? Once this war is over, the 5th Cavalry Division can be reorganized. Even though Yang Chendong's meaning was very clear and Xiao Yining was indeed moved, there was still a problem that he didn't clarify. Otherwise, he really wouldn't be happy. The 6th young master, if his performance is outstanding, can he be promoted? Of course. Otherwise, how can he join the 5th Cavalry Division? Yang Chendong said as if it was a matter of course. I understand. At this moment, Xiao Yining's face finally revealed a smile. At this moment, he even became a little excited. He was still thinking that with the current ratio of young and strong Han men in Crimson City, it would be difficult to recruit more than 4,000 people. If things went wrong, it would affect the strength of the 5th Cavalry Division. Now that they could train the soldiers on the battlefield and recruit good seedlings, the 5th Cavalry Division would definitely be able to quickly return to its former glory. After the general plan was set, Yang Chendong announced a few more details. For example, only those who killed 10 people on the battlefield would be allowed to be promoted. Other than that, those who performed well would be able to enter the B-grade troops, the auxiliary troops of Crimson City, and those who performed well would be able to enter the C-grade troops, the provincial troops. As for those who didn't perform well, they would be given money to chase them away. In short, they would only fight for the sake of producing elite soldiers. If there were really no suitable candidates, it would be better to not have them than to form an army for the sake of numbers. Otherwise, not only would they be scamming them, they would also be scamming themselves. On the battlefield, the enemy wouldn't be afraid because of the number of soldiers you had. On the battlefield, victory wouldn't be decided by who had more soldiers. Using battle to nurture soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner under Yang Chendong's decision. According to his requirements, any commoner between the age of 16 and 35 who was under the Yang faction's influence could sign up. Then, the various cities would report the list to the various provincial governments, and in the end, the provincial governments would transport the people to the battlefield. In order to encourage people to sign up, Yang Chendong also proposed that the number of soldiers each province could choose would have a close relationship with the provincial governor and the various officers at the end of the year. In the end, there would be a reward system, praising the provinces that performed well and scolding the provinces that didn't, etc. The temptation of being promoted was already very big, and now that it was directly related to the official rank evaluation, who wouldn't want to try their best? Immediately, under the encouragement and publicity of the local governments, there were many people who signed up. Batches of young men who met the requirements were sent to the North Army's new Second Army, Luo Po's, and the East Army's Yang Chendong's. In the East Army, the first army that was approved to train soldiers was the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers who followed Yang Chendong. Of course, this was not all the soldiers of the right age in Cambodia. With a population of 4 million, it was not a problem to select a few 100,000 suitable soldiers. These 50,000 soldiers were just the first batch of soldiers to be sent to the battlefield. The power of training soldiers was completely delegated to the 3 division commanders, Tian Hu, Xiao Yining, and Lu Zhua. After a discussion, they decided to only send 2,000 recruits to the battlefield at a time. In order to ensure that they would not be surrounded by the Siamese army, the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, and the 5th Division of the Lu Zhuapo would send veterans to accompany them. They would only be sent out when they encountered suitable opponents, so as to ensure that they could complete the training requirements under the circumstances of equal strength and strength. The 5-star army had sent out envoys according to the king's request, and the troops were heading to the capital, Bangkok. For this reason, it was said that the 5-star army in the south had stopped their attack on Pattaya. After receiving this news, the Siamese army, which was originally very nervous, immediately relaxed. Chapter 1041. It was at this time that a scout suddenly reported that a small unit of the 5-star army had left the border city of Bob and was heading towards Shafa City. After hearing the news, the Siamese army was very puzzled. The Siamese general guarding Shafa City immediately sent people to stop them, as if he wanted to persuade them to stop moving forward. In the middle of Bob and Shafa City, the two sides met. On one side was a Cambodian army of 2,000 people, and on the other side was a Siamese army of 5,000 people. The veterans of the 5-star army who followed and protected them quickly made a decision. This battle was worth fighting. At least in their eyes, if they were the ones fighting, they would not need 2,000 people, but 1,000 people would be enough to win. With this decision, the first training of the soldiers began. The mixed soldiers were mixed soldiers. They did not have much training and most of them relied on brute force. The result of the first battle was no surprise. More than 300 of the 2,000 soldiers were killed on the spot, and the rest fled back. According to the information obtained by the veteran scouts, not even 100 Siamese soldiers were killed. When the news reached Yang Chendong's ears, he was not surprised at all. Some soldiers who had not undergone systematic training were just a bunch of brute force. They did not even have a basic degree of cooperation. It was impossible for them to defeat the disciplined Siamese army. Just like the so-called Jianghu people, they might be a headache if they fought alone, but once they gathered together, no matter how many of them there were, they would not be a match for the imperial army. If the army made up of Lao men really wanted to win, they would have to learn how to cooperate, get used to blood, and really mature. Then, they might have the qualifications to defeat the Siamese army. Of course, this was not something that could be done overnight. Fortunately, Yang Chendong had time to wait. Even if more of these people died, Yang Chendong would not show any sadness. These were all alien races, and for a certain period of time, he had even thought about how to stop the growth of the alien race population and what kind of attitude and methods he should adopt towards these adult alien males. This was one of the methods that Yang Chendong had thought of. When a foreign woman married a Han man. From the looks of it, the effects were pretty good. Now that they had the advantage of sacrificing foreign men on the battlefield, even if foreign women wanted to get married in the future, they would have no choice but to choose Han men. This was a way to eliminate the foreign race. At the same time, it was also a kind of gospel for the Han men. It was also a vicious method that Yang Chendong used to unify the Han people. Perhaps some people could see this point. Perhaps there would be people in the future who would comment on this matter. Some people might even criticize his backbone because of this, but Yang Chendong did not care. What he wanted was the day when the Han people became strong and dominated the world. As for what others thought of him, it was not important. To paraphrase a saying, who cares if there is a flood after his death? The first attack failed, but soon the second Cambodian army was sent out. They were either inspired by the fact that the 5-star army, with less than 10,000 people, could fight for so long against the Siamese army and won a great victory, so they looked down on the Siamese army. Or maybe the conditions that Yang Chendong gave to the victors were so good that they could not bear to try. Or maybe it was because they wanted to prove themselves through this battle. They wanted to tell their relatives in their hometown and their women that the 5-star army was not the only one in the world who knew how to fight. They were real men and they could do it too. Regardless of the reason, there were waves of Cambodian soldiers. Under the control of the 5-star army, they were divided into groups of 2,000 people and entered the Siamese territory, looking for an opportunity to fight the Siamese army. At this moment, in the capital of Siam, Mangu City, Minister Ma Dali had appeared as the representative of Xianxia. He was warmly received by Prime Minister Hamad. What was a politician? The performance of the two men was obvious. No matter how fierce the battle was before and how many people were killed or injured, when they met this time, their faces were full of joy. Those who did not know the inside story would definitely think that the two men must be old friends. They would never think that they were scheming against each other. On the way into the city, Hamad even prepared a small welcoming ceremony to show the people that Siam still loved peace. Even when the situation was good, they still negotiated with the emissary sent by Xianxia. This showed that they were broad-minded. Yes, in the hearts of most of the Siamese who did not know the situation, they were the most powerful when they had just entered the city. Even in this battle against the 5-star army, from the beginning until now, they had always been in a dominant position. Not long ago, there was news that the leader of the 5-star army was surrounded by them. If it were not for the sake of peace in the future and wanting to persuade the leader to surrender, they would have killed him directly. That was a war where hundreds of thousands of people surrounded less than 10,000 enemies. Even if everyone spat, the war would have ended. Ma Dali walked beside Hammond with a smile on his face as they crossed the street. In fact, he and his team had heard the discussions of the people on the streets. Those who were able to enter the Foreign Affairs Department were naturally knowledgeable people. Among them, there were many graduates of the Yang Family Academy and the Crimson City Academy. When they entered the school, they were exposed to a course called Foreign Languages. In the words of the founder, Yang Chendong, if you want to defeat your enemy, you must first understand your enemy. For this reason, Ma Dali had brought many talents who understood Siamese into this team. Even he had no problem conversing with them. With this advantage, the conversations of the people on the street naturally fell into their ears. This allowed them to have a deeper understanding of the situation in Bangkok and obtain first-hand information. All of this was outside of Hamad's expectations. He was certain that there were people who understood Siamese in this team, just like how there were people who understood Chinese beside him. However, the number was definitely not too many. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lined the streets to express his sincerity. Both parties passed through the commotion and finally arrived at the courtyard in the city that was specially used to receive foreign ambassadors. Upon entering, the originally smiling Ma Dali and Hamad seemed to have changed into a different person. Their smiles were retracted and replaced with a solemn expression. Esteemed envoy Ma, you must be tired from the long journey. Take a rest for the night. If there is anything else, we will discuss it tomorrow. Hamad didn't immediately enter his role. He needed to give Ma Dali some time to rest. He also needed to think carefully about what to do next. Ma Dali acted as if he didn't understand Hamad's words. Only when the interpreter translated the words into Chinese did he nod and say, "Thank you for your understanding. Since that is the case, we will meet again tomorrow." When he said that he would see her the next day, no one would have thought that this delay would be half a month later. Of course, at this moment, Hamad was truly prepared to have a good discussion with Ma Dali tomorrow and see what the other party wanted. Therefore, after settling down the 5-star army ambassadors, he headed straight for the palace. According to his intention, he would first report to the king and receive a general decree. Upon entering the palace, not only did Hamad see the king, Iliqui, he also saw another first-rank general guarding the western border of Siam, Chun Hong. According to the Great Ming Dynasty system, Chun Hong was considered a relative of the emperor. His sister married Iliqui and was deeply favored by the emperor. Because of this, he was promoted several times from a small general stationed with 100 soldiers. In the end, he became a first-rank general, second only to Gordon. Relatives of the king were not allowed to interfere in politics. This was the same everywhere. Thus, Chun Hong had no choice but to leave the capital and head to the safest western border of Siam. He became a first-rank general in name and was mainly responsible for dealing with the Awol dynasty. To put it bluntly, he was completely a figurehead. This time, they had started an all-out war with the Five-Star Army. They had seized the initiative and were now in a stalemate. The situation was gradually developing in a bad direction. It could be said that it was the time for the entire country to mobilize their troops. As a first-rank general, Chun Hong naturally returned. Not only that, when he returned, he brought with him good news that he had just received from the military. The Five-Star Army's attacks from the north and east had suddenly become weak. News of the Siam Army's victories came from the front lines. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor, Nyoibo Studio. Good news made Yelinki very happy. After knowing the purpose of Chun Huang's visit, Yelinki immediately welcomed him. Yelinki knew the whole story and knew that the Five-Star Army had been launching attacks every day. Although the scale of the attacks was not very big, it was a real attack. The Siamese army naturally fought back. Originally, they were expecting a fierce battle. But who would have thought that the Five-Star Army could not fight anymore? Is this true? King Iliqui's face was filled with disbelief as he asked. Yes, there are battle reports from all sides. One of them was written by General Gordon himself. Chun Hong said with a face full of flattery and joy. As the saying goes, love the house and its crow. Since he liked Chun Huang's sister, Iliqui naturally did not dislike Chun Hong. Now that Chun Hong brought news of victory, he could not help but laugh heartily. This was the first time Iliqui laughed heartily since the start of the war with the Five-Star Army. At this time, Hammond entered the palace to report the situation. When he saw the king laughing so happily, he was also curious. Your Majesty, when did you become so happy? Tell me and I will be happy too. Ha, good. General Chun, tell the Prime Minister about this. Iliqui was in a good mood and immediately agreed. Chapter 1042. With a smile on his face, Chun Hong turned around and bowed to Hammond. He then said, Prime Minister, news just came from the front lines. The Five-Star Army's attack is weak. After several battles, they have suffered heavy losses. Our side has won. And this is all thanks to His Majesty. His Majesty's troops represent the righteous. Even the heavenly sect was moved, resulting in today's victory. Chun Hong did not forget to take the opportunity to flatter the king. At the same time, he was carefully observing Hammond's reaction. Just like in most dynasties, civil and military were at odds. In Siam, civil and military rarely got along. In particular, the reason why Chun Hong left the capital for Shijiang was because of the advice of Hammond and the other civil officials. He hated these people from the bottom of his heart. But because the king valued these civil officials, he had no choice but to deal with them. But no action did not mean no thoughts. During his time in Shijiang, Chun Hong was constantly thinking about revenge. This time, he was looking for an opportunity to do so. In his view, if he wanted to take revenge, the first person he had to deal with was the Prime Minister, who wielded enormous influence in the court. If he did not topple this mountain, once the war was over, he would probably have to return to the western border to suffer. Prime Minister Hammond didn't think too much about it. At least at this moment, his mind was completely focused on government affairs. When he heard Chun Hong say that the situation on the front lines was starting to turn for the better, he was truly confused. If not for the fact that he understood General Gordon and knew that this person was the worst at lying, he would have doubted the veracity of this matter. Since even General Gordon said that the front lines had won, Hammond had to think carefully about what was going on. From the bottom of his heart, Hammond did not believe it. A five-star army that could defeat the Jiaoji Kingdom, the Lansong Dynasty, and the Golden Bian Dynasty, as well as occupy the Luzon Island and a large area of the sea, they stunned everyone from the moment they appeared. With their strong financial resources and powerful military capabilities, there were few who would not follow their orders. How could such an army suddenly have such a low combat strength? This didn't make any sense at all. Hammond suddenly stopped talking. He didn't express any opinion and just stood there with a frown on his face. Chun Hong saw all of this and it was difficult for him to find a weakness. He had no choice but to continue asking, "Prime Minister? Why do you look unhappy? Are you unhappy that the army won the battle at the front lines?" After this reminder, even King Ili Chi paid attention to it. But out of trust, he still said, "How can that be? The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister of Siam. He will naturally be happy to hear that the frontline army has won the battle." "Yes, of course I'm happy." At this moment, Hammond also recovered and hurriedly replied. But after saying this, he still voiced out his doubts. "It's just that the five-star army has always been known for their extraordinary combat strength. Why did they suddenly become weak this time?" "Weakened?" Chun Hong finally caught the opportunity and said, "How can it be weakened? It should be because our Siam army is too strong. Under His Majesty's wise leadership, we have vigorously developed our military. The treatment and training of the army are the best. Why can't such a good army win the battle?" "Prime Minister, as a general leading an army, I really can't agree with what you're saying. The Siamese army was indeed stronger than the other neighboring countries. But if it was said that they could easily defeat the five-star army, Hammond would never believe it. He decided to see for himself and personally go to the front line to see for himself." "Your Majesty, I am willing to go to the front line. Please allow it." This was Hammond's strength. He would not easily agree with the opinions of others. He would only make a decision after seeing the results. This was also the reason why Ili Chi felt at ease using him, so he didn't even hesitate and agreed to this request. Hammond had something on his mind, so he didn't stay for long. Before he left, he only said that the emissary from the five-star army had arrived, and before the battle was completely settled, he still had to receive him with courtesy. He then left the palace hall, leaving behind Chun Hong to watch him leave. He said with some dissatisfaction, "Your Majesty, he doesn't trust our army and General Gordon." "Sigh, General Chun, don't think too much. Prime Minister is such a serious person. It's good to let him see. That way we can rest assured." Ilikui was not influenced by Chun Huang's words. In his heart, he didn't really believe this news. He also hoped that someone could make a trip. Hammond's volunteering was exactly what he wanted. Ma Dali, who was in the emissary group's courtyard, did not know about this. The next morning, not only did he not see Hammond, who was supposed to be here, but everyone was also grounded. Considering that the two countries were at war, they were not allowed to leave the courtyard for fear of being affected. Fortunately, food and drinks were delivered in time. Otherwise, the minister would have to consider whether Siam was going to reveal their true intentions. The training of the soldiers on the northern and eastern fronts continued. The battle situation did not improve. The 40,000 Laotian soldiers on the northern front and the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers on the eastern front were sent out for battle for the third time. Relatively speaking, they would still lose against the Siam army. It was just that they did not lose as quickly. However, it was still far from a draw. It was also at this time that a steady stream of reserve troops arrived. After receiving Yang Chendong's orders, the provinces immediately started recruiting soldiers. The attractive policies were also spread to all the provinces under Yang Xie's control. Once they performed well, they could be promoted. Such a temptation tempted the foreign youths, who knew the power of the Han people, to no avail. With the opportunity in front of them, there were not many who did not want to seize it and give it a try. There were many such applicants. In a short period of time, 200,000 youths had signed up. It was said that this was only a portion of the total. There would be more applicants in the future. Since there were so many people who wanted to sign up, Yang Chendong naturally did not reject any of them. Yang Xie, who did not lack food, was never afraid of having too many people. He only despised having too few people. When the new batch of soldiers arrived, the disadvantage on the battlefield became even more obvious. In contrast, the morale of the Siam army was increasing day by day. The continuous victories had made some of the soldiers feel smug. When they found out that as long as they encountered the five-star army, they would definitely be the ones to win. Although they didn't get much, they still had some achievements. They could report their military exploits and receive money. Therefore, everyone became more active. This was especially true when they discovered that their numbers were too large and they often couldn't find an opponent. When their numbers were only around 2,000, the 5-star army would take the initiative to jump out. They immediately divided their troops into groups of 2,000, allowing them to obtain more small-scale victories. A small victory was still a victory. Wasn't there a saying that went, "Many a little makes a man"? The Siam army was tirelessly busy. There were reports of victory every day. They were delivered to the commander of the army. Prime Minister Hammond, who had come to understand the actual situation, saw everything clearly. The battle reports were real. From time to time, some corpses of the 5-star army soldiers would be sent back. These could not be faked. All of this made Hammond speechless. Even the Siam army in the east had achieved such a great victory. With General Gordon leading the army in the north, there was nothing to doubt about the results. What was going on? Was the 5-star army's strength not enough due to the continuous expansion? Or was their standard just average to begin with? It was just that people had made them legends. Hammond could not understand this question. However, there was no need to think about it. Since they had achieved victory on the battlefield, there was nothing to be afraid of. He had to immediately return to the capital to report. At the same time, he had to change his strategy against the 5-star army. Chapter 1043. After 20 days of training, there were finally results. Beta Persei also agreed happily. And it was from this day onwards that the situation on the battlefield began to change subtly. Similarly, the enemy was no longer defeated by the 5-star army after encountering each other. Sometimes they could even fight to a draw, and occasionally they could even turn defeat into victory. At first, the Siamese army did not feel anything about the changes on the battlefield. When someone reported the situation to his superior, the general did not take it seriously. He thought that it must be his soldiers who were slacking off. That was why they praised the enemy so highly. For this reason, the general even scolded a few of the informants. He suppressed the informants with the authority of a superior officer. Suppressing the gourd would lead to the emergence of the ladle. Suppressing some matters by force might not necessarily lead to a good outcome. What was more frightening was that on the battlefield, if you underestimated your opponent, there would only be one outcome: death or defeat. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed. More and more ambitious young men under the Xianxia forces came to the battlefield. More and more people began to participate in the battle and displayed their advantages. As the number of actual combat increased, many men with excellent results were reflected. Among them, the number of people who were promoted by Yang Chendong alone exceeded 5,000. All of them had been tested in actual combat. They had participated in more than 20 battles, both large and small. Among them, the weakest one had accumulated 20 kills on the battlefield. With the demonstration of these 5,000 young men, the young men of the other races were greatly stimulated. They performed even more bravely and fiercely on the battlefield, strengthening the transition from new recruits to old soldiers, and also increasing the proportion of old soldiers. At one point, the number of old soldiers had reached over 60,000. The 5-star army had achieved such great results. The Siamese army felt it the most. They had originally prepared 120,000 people, all of whom were trained soldiers. But now, the number of people was less than 50,000. Seeing that the 5-star army's offensive did not weaken and was still so strong, they had no choice but to send a request for reinforcements to the capital. It wasn't that they couldn't defeat the 5-star army, and it wasn't that they didn't fight with their lives on the line. It was just that there were too many of them, so many that it seemed like they would never be able to kill them. In fact, the 5-star army had paid a heavy price. Countless recruits had died in the first battle. In terms of numbers, they were not inferior to the Siamese army. Manga City suddenly received a request for reinforcements from the East Army, which was beyond the king's expectations. Didn't they say that the battle at the front lines was going well and that the 5-star army had suffered heavy losses and that they wouldn't be able to hold on if this continued? Why was it his own side that needed reinforcements? What kind of situation was this? Countless question marks involuntarily appeared in his mind. Liqi immediately summoned Prime Minister Hammond and first-ranked General Chun Hong to seek their opinions. The two representatives of the civil and military officials hurried into the palace. Just as they were confused, Liqi threw an urgent letter for help at their feet with an unfriendly expression. "Take a look and see what's going on." The two picked up the letter and their expressions quickly turned heavy. Chun Hong was the only first-ranked general in the palace. In fact, he had been in charge of military affairs and understood the situation at the front lines very well. Indeed, the news of victory had been constantly spreading. As time passed, he had already gotten used to it. He wouldn't become so excited because of the news of victory. In fact, in his opinion, this battle should be over soon. Perhaps, it would be worth celebrating when they achieved a great victory over the five-star army. Needless to say, Hammond personally understood the situation at the front lines. 10 days ago, the news of victory was still spreading. Why did they need to request reinforcements from the royal capital so quickly? Could it be that the five-star army's reinforcements had arrived? When he thought of this, Hammond suddenly remembered something. The intelligence personnel he sent to investigate the five-star army hadn't contacted him for 7 to 8 days. Logically speaking, if there was any situation, they should have contacted him at least once every 3 to 5 days. But this time, it was so long. Did something happen to them? What did this mean? The faces of the two ministers became heavy. However, without enough understanding, how could they know what to say at this moment? He was facing the king. One wrong word, one wrong decision, and it could bring about terrible consequences. The two didn't speak, but it didn't mean that the matter would pass. Looking at the two who had turned mute, Liqi's displeased voice sounded again. "What? Why aren't you speaking? This king is asking for your opinion." Liqi was about to get angry. Chun Hong was afraid and couldn't help but raise his head and say, "Your Majesty, perhaps the five-star army sent reinforcements. After all, the battle has been going on for almost a month and the battles are fierce every day. The soldiers at the front lines must be exhausted and need fresh blood to ensure victory." Exhausted? So, in your opinion, are you going to agree to send reinforcements? Liqi heard this ambiguous answer and asked in displeasure. "According to the rules of the battlefield, the soldiers can't be used frequently. We should send reinforcements." Chun Hong knew that he couldn't continue wavering. He could only grit his teeth and express his determination. After Chun Hong expressed his opinion, it was naturally Hammond's turn. Logically speaking, he had lost the support of his informants and should first understand the situation before making a final decision. But this time, Liqi was in a fit of rage. If he gave such an answer, it was clearly inappropriate. During this period of time, Chun Hong had been active in the royal city. He had already roped in a lot of ministers and had also said a lot of bad things about himself. At this moment, he absolutely could not do anything wrong. Otherwise, it would be like handing over his weakness to his opponent. "Your Majesty, this official also believes that we should send reinforcements. But the matters at the front lines shouldn't be too urgent. Your Majesty should also take care of your body." After coming to a decision, Hammond's expression relaxed and he replied fluently. Hearing Hammond's tone wasn't heavy and even seemed to be relaxed, Liqi's heart was greatly reassured. He knew his prime minister too well. He had always planned before acting. Since he said it was fine, then there shouldn't be much to worry about. But before Liqi could speak, Chun Hong, who saw him as a thorn in his side, took the initiative to express his opinion. "Prime Minister, how can you be so sure that there won't be any problems?" First, there was a light chuckle. Then, the confident Hammond said with confidence, "There are 3 reasons. First, General Dong Dong sent an urgent message of 300 miles. If the matter is urgent, he should send an urgent message of 800 miles. Second, General Gordon of the Northern Army hasn't sent a signal for reinforcements. It can be seen that even if the 5-star army sent reinforcements, the scale is limited and can only support one side of the battle. Third, the location of the battle is within Siam. Compared to transporting supplies and fodder, we have a shorter distance and faster speed. Even if we compare the expenditure, the 5-star army won't be able to afford it. When the 3 points were mentioned, Ha Chun Wang shut his mouth. He knew that he wasn't a match for a scholar in terms of eloquence. Moreover, this was the representative of scholars, Hammond. Hearing this, King Eliqui was very happy. Good, as expected of my Prime Minister. What you said is reasonable. Even if the 5-star army sent reinforcements, we should also send reinforcements. This time, we will let them see the strength of Siam and let them know that we aren't comparable to Lansong and Golden Rim. We, Siam, are the strongest and cannot be defeated. Following Eliqui's laughter, the matter of sending reinforcements to the Eastern Army was settled. In order to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army, they sent out 100,000 reinforcements. At this point, Siam's original 800,000 troops had been sent out to 500,000, more than half of the original force. The scholar and military left the palace. Ha Chun Wang snorted and rolled his eyes before leaving Hammond behind. He didn't bicker with him because he still had many things to do. For example, sending out intelligence agents to investigate the situation at the front lines and find out where the previous intelligence agents had gone. For example, it was time to have a discussion with Maudali. In his eyes, this was a war where both sides would suffer losses. The sooner they stopped fighting, the sooner both sides would benefit. And so, in the diplomatic mission's courtyard, after 25 days, almost a month, Maudali finally met with Hammond once again. Oh, Prime Minister, you are so busy. Upon meeting, Maudali mocked the other party. Speaking of which, he couldn't be blamed for being so angry. After being ignored for almost a month, anyone would be angry. Before coming, Hammond had already expected Xianxia's special envoy to be unhappy. He immediately cupped his fist and said, "My apologies, my sincere apologies. There was a small problem at the front lines. I just finished dealing with it. The first thing I did after returning is to see you." A small problem at the front lines? What's the matter? Through the interpreter, Maudali pretended to understand and asked. At first, he looked pained, then Hammond raised his head and said, "Isn't it because there are too many captives at the front lines? My king is benevolent and has sent these captives back to the royal capital. There are so many people who need to eat, so I, as the Prime Minister, have to take care of them. That is why I have neglected you. Please forgive me." As Hammond spoke, he paid attention to Maudali's reaction. He wanted to see something from this person's expression, but he didn't know that he didn't understand Maudali at all. Specifically, there were 3 things he didn't understand. First, as Xianxia's foreign minister, Maudali's ability to communicate with people was outstanding. He was also the best at reading people's expressions. Any small mistake made by an opponent could be caught and analyzed. So, it was better to forget about playing mind games with such a person. It would be good enough if he didn't fall for others' schemes. Chapter 1044. Secondly, Maudali understood Siamese. After diligently studying for the past 20 days, he could be considered proficient. This gave him more room to think and react. On the surface, it seemed like he still needed to listen to the interpreter, but in reality he already knew the specifics and had already begun to react. Thirdly, and the most important one, this time, the diplomatic mission was equipped with a telegraph. This meant that whenever he needed to know about anything that happened on the front lines, Yang Chendong would report it to him, allowing him to understand the battle situation and Yang Chendong's thoughts so that he could determine the next step. All of this had been carried out in secret. On the surface, it seemed like the 100-odd members of the diplomatic mission hadn't left the courtyard, but they were well aware of the situation outside. As for the specific changes on the battlefield, he had even learned of them a few days earlier than Hammond. With these 3 advantages, if Hammond still wanted to play tricks and schemes with Maudali, wouldn't that be asking for humiliation? It was clearly victory that had turned into defeat, yet Maudali was still pretending to be the victor in front of him. Hearing this, Maudali sneered in his heart, but pretended to be extremely shocked, as if he was panicking. "What? Sir Minister said the 5-star army suffered a great defeat on the front lines? "That's impossible, impossible, our reinforcements will arrive soon, although they are untrained civilians." At this point, Ma Dali suddenly shut his mouth, and with an awkward expression, he took a sip of water from the cup in front of him. It seemed like he did it in a moment of desperation, but it was actually for Hammond to hear. The crux of the matter was how he said it to the other party, and how much of it the other party would believe. From the looks of it, his goal should be achieved. Indeed, he had achieved his goal. Ma Dali's performance was too realistic, and in addition to this sudden question, people would often involuntarily answer the most realistic situation. More importantly, Hammond was certain that Ma Dali didn't know what had happened on the front lines, so he didn't have time to lie to the 5-star army. Of course, the most important point was that the result of his analysis was that the 5-star army had reinforcements. Ma Dali's answer coincided with his own inference. However, he did not expect that the reinforcements would be untrained civilians. If all of this was true, Siam only needed to block the attacks of the 5-star army to turn the tables and regain control of the battle. Immensely excited by this sudden news, Hammond suppressed his decision to negotiate with Ma Dali. He only expressed his concern for food and accommodation, saying that since they were in Bangkok, they were guests. If there was anything they needed, they could ask at any time. Following that, Hammond left with an anxious expression. He was indeed a little anxious. He needed to report the situation to the king, and then reconsider how many reinforcements to send. In the Siamese palace, King Yaliki was overjoyed when he heard Hamad's report. So, the 5-star army did send reinforcements, and it should have been discussed beforehand. It's just that they have no reinforcements to send, so they sent some civilians? This special envoy has been out for more than a month. Naturally, he wouldn't be clear about the situation on the battlefield. The fact that he mentioned reinforcements should be the policy that the 5-star army agreed on before he came. Congratulations, Your Majesty. The 5-star army has sent out all of their elites, and now they even need to send in civilians. Facing these untrained people, apart from their numbers, there is nothing to be afraid of. Hammond bowed and congratulated. This caused Hammond to burst out in laughter. Good. Lord Prime Minister, you've handled this matter well. Now that we know the truth about the 5-star army, in your opinion, how should we deal with them? Your Majesty, I believe that the enemy's only advantage is their numbers. If we can dispatch more soldiers to join the battle and create an unstoppable momentum, I believe victory won't be too difficult. Hammond, who had already come up with a plan on the way here, said excitedly. Ministers will means to continue to send in reinforcements? Ili Chi roughly understood the meaning behind these words. Yes, continue to send in reinforcements. As long as we can defeat the 5-star army, victory will not be difficult. We can even use this opportunity to expand the territory of our Siam kingdom. Hammond, who was brimming with confidence, had a smile and excitement on his face. Ili Chi had always valued Hammond's ability. After hearing his analysis, Ili Chi felt that it was reasonable. He nodded and said, "There are still 300,000 soldiers in the capital waiting to be deployed. In your opinion, what should we do?" "Forgive me for being so bold, but Your Majesty, please show your courage and only leave 100,000 behind. Send 100,000 reinforcements to the north and east respectively. Attack with an overwhelming advantage and completely frighten the 5-star army. Strike their morale and this battle will determine the outcome. Right? Since we have sent out so many reinforcements, the battle strategy must be changed. We can't just send out 2,000 people at a time to engage the enemy in guerrilla warfare. We should gather them together to achieve a deterrent effect." "Good, then we will immediately convene a court meeting to hear the opinions of the officials." Seeing that Hammond's words were reasonable, Ili Chi had already agreed to 70% of it. The so-called meeting of the officials was just to discuss some specific matters. The king had already agreed in his heart, and the minister was also in full agreement. Naturally, no one in the court meeting would be blind enough to stop them. Even though Chun Hong wasn't happy that Hammond had stolen the limelight, he could only watch hatefully from the sidelines. After sending 100,000 reinforcements to the east, The capital sent another 100,000 to the north and east respectively. At this point, Siam Kingdom had sent out 700,000 of its 800,000 regular soldiers. It was not an exaggeration to call it a war of the entire country. Since Siam Kingdom sent reinforcements, Xianxia, who had been left in Bangkok, sent the news through the radio. Yang Chendong was also very happy when he heard the news. Siam Kingdom also sent a large army to their deaths. It was like someone giving him a pillow when he was sleepy. Pass down the order. Tian Hu and the others are to come to the main tent for a meeting. The main force of Siam Kingdom's army was finally sent out. This gave Yang Chendong the opportunity to defeat them one by one. This was also one of his plans. Otherwise, with the 800,000 Siam Kingdom's army gathered together, Yang Xie's army might not have the strength to do so. Yang Chendong called Tian Hu and the others over and informed them of the Siamese army's movements. Yang Chendong then asked them to change their tactics. Since there were so many enemies, they would not play a game of 2,000 against 2,000. But to say 100,000 against 100,000 was not Yang Chendong's intention. The so-called excellent commanders on the battlefield had to think of ways to take the initiative and then guide the situation of the battlefield to develop as they wished. Yang Chendong was undoubtedly an excellent commander, so he made the decision to change the battle from 2,000 to 5,000 people. At the same time, he also made a tactical decision to retreat when necessary, lure the enemy to chase, and then force the enemy to split up. To put it bluntly, if the enemy's forces were relatively concentrated, then retreat. There was no rush to fight the enemy. When the enemy began to split up, then look for an opportunity to fight. It was like eating rice, one bite at a time. The tactical plan was decided, and the next step was to execute it. There were still some days before the main force of Siam Kingdom's reinforcements arrived. This was the time the 5-star army had to prepare. It could be said that there was plenty of time. It had been more than 2 months since the battle with Siam Kingdom, and this was one of the few times Yang Chendong fought a battle. Looking at the past, Yang Chendong preferred to use the method of cutting the Gordian not when destroying a force or a country. For example, when he attacked North Korea, he did it in a spurt of energy and did not give the enemy any time to react. When he attacked the Phnom Penh dynasty, which was now Cambodia, it only took him 31 days from the first shot to the end. The reason for this result was that 1, he was well prepared, and 2, he had sufficient military strength. But this time, the well-prepared side was Siam. They first made all the plans, then they began the attack with 800,000 soldiers. They caught Yang Xie off guard, and the time limit of the battle was constantly extended. Fortunately, Yang Chendong finally controlled the rhythm of the battle. Next, it was time to watch the performance of the 5-star army. Siam Kingdom's reinforcements began to appear on the battlefield. First, they gathered in the eastern border city of Siam Kingdom. Then, in an echelon of 50,000 soldiers, a total of 550,000 soldiers went out of the city and pressed against the 5-star army. The 5-star army, which had been prepared for a long time, immediately began to withdraw their forces. They kept retreating, showing that they did not dare to fight. In order to attract the enemy's attention and find a suitable opportunity to attack, they retreated back to Cambodia. In the beginning, some people were worried that if they retreated from Siam Kingdom, the Siam Kingdom's army of 250,000 soldiers would continue to pursue them. In the face of such worries, Yang Chendong gave a very positive answer. A greedy person would never be satisfied. Look, the Siam Kingdom would not stop advancing because of their retreat. After all, they were the ones who launched the first attack. Their intention to expand was very clear. The fact was as Yang Chendong expected. When the 5-star army retreated from Siam Kingdom and returned to Bob, the border city of Cambodia, the Siam Kingdom's army crossed the border and chased after them. Obviously, the arrival of the 200,000 reinforcements boosted the morale of some people. They wanted to make a big contribution. Chapter 1045. Since that was the case, Yang Chendong had no choice but to fulfill their wish. In order to inflict heavy damage to the Siamese army, Yang Chendong made 2 decisions. First, lure the enemy deep into their territory. Second, strengthen the defense and clear the field. He wanted to lure the greedy Siamese army into his territory and then look for an opportunity to attack. At the same time, he would not leave anything useful for the enemy. He would force the enemy to transport food from a long distance and then attack them. When it came to strengthening the defense and clearing the field, the party carrying out the plan would have to pay a price. The loss would be to the benefit of the people. Fortunately, the Siamese army had previously passed through these towns and cities. Along the way, they had burned, killed, and looted. The people had already suffered a disaster and had nothing valuable in their hands. This made the strengthening of the defense and clearing of the field much easier. The 250,000 Siamese soldiers continued to march forward, singing songs of victory. They were arrogant as they passed through Bob, Siam, Angkor, and other places. They followed the edge of the Tunnel Sai River into the depths of Cambodia. When the news reached Bangkok, King Ili Chi was very happy. He did not expect the seemingly powerful five-star army to be so weak. He was glad that he had listened to Hamad and sent a large number of reinforcements. Otherwise, he would have been intimidated by the five-star army. Ili Kui was in a good mood. Even the people of Siam felt good about themselves. When the streets and alleys were filled with news of the victories of the frontline soldiers, the people were overjoyed. Some of them even went to the compound of the diplomatic mission to express their excitement. They tried to enter the compound and parade Ma Dali and the others to the public. After all, this was the relay station of the Siamese ambassadors. The Siamese soldiers guarding this place would not allow ordinary people to enter. However, as more and more people gathered nearby, they finally could not withstand the pressure and sent someone to report to Hamad. When two armies were at war, they would not kill the ambassadors. Moreover, the Siamese army had not achieved the final victory. On the battlefield, the situation was ever-changing. If the ambassadors sent by the five-star army were killed, the two sides would have to fight to the death. Seeing this, Hammond arrived outside the diplomatic mission's compound and brought 1,000 soldiers with him to protect the place. Logically speaking, this was the most normal action and even something within his duty. But when all of this fell into the eyes of the first-rank General Chun Hong, who had always wanted to cause trouble, he saw an opportunity. Under his instigation, news quickly spread through the streets of the royal capital. Prime Minister Hammond had long been on good terms with the five-star army. This time, he even risked defending the citizens to ensure the safety of the five-star army's emissary. There was no smoke without fire. Many untrue things were often controlled by rumors and eventually became facts in people's eyes. Hamad advocated for the use of a large number of reinforcements, which won the king's praise, especially his advocacy of large-scale operations, not giving the five-star army a chance to defeat them one by one, which allowed the army to continuously occupy large areas of Cambodia. All of these were contributions, and they were the cause and effect of envy, jealousy, and hatred in the eyes of others. When one person's contributions were too great, it would attract the dissatisfaction of others. At this moment, Hammond was like this. Originally, as the Prime Minister, he was the leader of the officials. This time, with such a great contribution, it naturally caused others to feel a sense of hatred towards a common enemy. At this time, Chun Hong made his move. With him as the leader, the officials who were implicated collectively wrote a petition to impeach Hammond, saying that he had secretly colluded with the five-star army's diplomatic mission and did not hesitate to mobilize the Siamese army to fight against the Siamese citizens. This was the greatest provocation to the imperial power. Ili Chi, who was able to lead Siam into the era of great cities, was not a foolish person. When he saw these memorials, he was not moved. Instead, he put them aside and walked towards the harem. In the harem, the most favored concubine, Chun Hoang's sister, had already received the news. When she saw the king, she naturally fawned over him and served him well. She seemed to have noticed that Ili Kui's expression was not good, so she asked him about the reason. The king was also a human, and similarly he had his own happiness and worries. Some things were not suitable for him to tell his subordinates, so the person next to him became the target of his venting. Therefore, he told the king about the impeachment of Hammond. his beloved concubine, who was already prepared, was not willing to let go of the opportunity to speak. She said, seemingly intentionally or unintentionally, "The king need not worry, the prime minister has done many things for the country. His contributions have already spread throughout the harem, and there are even people who say, when one stopped speaking it often had a different effect. For example, when his beloved concubine suddenly stopped speaking, it was rather suspenseful, and it successfully attracted Hamon's attention." What did people say? This I dare not say. Her face was filled with fear. It had to be said that her talent was wasted if she did not go into acting. "It's fine, I forgive you. Speak." The more she acted like this, the more Liqui wanted to know what was going on. Completely forced, his beloved concubine said, "My subordinates said that the prime minister's contributions are great. If not for him, Siam would be in danger. If not for him, Siam would have been defeated by the 5-star army. Such a person is definitely a wise man, a great contributor. Enough." Without waiting for his beloved concubine to finish speaking, Liqui's face was filled with anger. As a king, he was wary of his subordinates' incompetence and uselessness, but he was even more wary of his subordinates' abilities. Otherwise, why would there be a saying, "The most meritorious man is the town lord"? According to what his beloved concubine said, it seemed that Siam's achievements today were all due to Xianggua's efforts. Even he, the monarch, could not compare to him. How could this not anger Liqui, who had always been confident and had a strong sense of self-esteem? He had to admit that Hamon was very capable, so much so that he could entrust him with many things without worry. However, when he did everything well and even won a great reputation as the king, he had to worry about whether his subordinates' contributions were too great. Speaking of which, it was really difficult to be a subordinate. He could not do it, but he could not do it too well either. He really did not know what to do. His beloved concubine's words seemed to have nothing to say, but the words "the most meritorious man" had been deeply buried in Liqui's heart. He was worried that some people's contributions were too great, so he had already planned to suppress them. However, Liqui was indeed capable. He did not plan to deal with Hamon now. Instead, he wanted to wait until after the battle with the 5-star army was over. This trip to the harem was nothing more than a thorn in his heart. Hamon was unaware of all this. He continued to conscientiously carry out his duties. Even though he knew that many people were impeaching him, he did not take it seriously. Everything was because he knew that Liqui was a wise king. He would not doubt himself because of the words of others. Therefore, he did what he should do and did not restrain himself. However, it was this confidence that brought him disaster. Xianxia Foreign Minister Maudali, who knew the world's affairs without going out, was trapped in the compound and seemed to have no contact with the outside world. However, through a small radio station, the outside world could not be hidden from his eyes and ears. After receiving a telegram from the intelligence department's southeast branch, Yunk, and knowing what was happening outside, he found a Siamese person in charge of the matters here in the compound and requested to see the first-rank General Chun Hong. Chun Hong wanted to use this Xianxia diplomatic mission to harm the prime minister. Naturally, he would try his best to bribe anyone in the compound. This person in charge was one of those bribed. This information was found out by Yunk and the others. Naturally, Maudali's request fell into Chun Huang's ears. When he first heard the news, Chun Hong did not understand Maudali's intentions. However, the more it was so, the more he felt that this meeting was necessary. He immediately decided to meet with Maudali. Thus, under the arrangements of his subordinates and without alerting the prime minister, he entered the diplomatic compound to meet with Maudali. When they first met, Maudali lowered his status and even tried to flatter Chun Hong. At first, he gave Chun Hong a good impression. The meeting was very pleasant. Maudali took the opportunity to speak according to the plan. The Siamese army is invincible. Although I have been trapped here for a long time, I have not received any news from the 5-star army for a long time. Your king also has no intention of receiving us. I can imagine what will happen. In the interest of peace and friendship, he is willing to represent the 5-star army and take the initiative to negotiate. He is even willing to give half of Cambodia to Siam. He just hopes that this war will end sooner. Ma Dali spoke with great sincerity. Chun Hong had no choice but to believe him. Since Ma Dali was here to show goodwill, this was a good thing. He was overjoyed and said, "Very good. Your esteemed envoy is able to see the situation clearly. You are indeed a smart person. However, I wonder if your words can represent the highest level of the 5-star army?" "Of course. Otherwise, wouldn't my position as an envoy become a joke? In fact, I won't hide it from the great general. When I first came here this time, I wanted to negotiate with your country, but no one listened to me. Thus, I took the initiative to look for you. I know that you are a smart person. You will definitely agree to this mutually beneficial answer. So, as long as the general agrees, we can immediately do what we said. We, the 5-star army, are willing to cede our territory to Siam for the sake of our reputation. We only ask that you hand General Tong over to us so that we can answer to the outside world." Chapter 1046. Ma Dali finally revealed his trump card, General Tong Si. This was something he had discussed with Yang Chendong beforehand. Their instincts told them that this person would be of great use. When Tong Si was mentioned, Ha Chun Wang sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew that this person was already waiting for his death in the dungeon. However, no matter what, he was still a general of Siam. If he were to hand him over to the 5-star army, what would the people outside say? He couldn't help but ask with some difficulty, "Esteemed ambassador, must you take Tong Si?" "Yes, we must. This concerns the reputation of our 5-star army. Our leader said that we must see him alive or dead," Ma Dali said with an unquestionable tone. When he heard that, Ha Chun Wang immediately had a plan in his mind. If they wanted to see the corpse, it would be easy. He could find a random excuse and say that it was Tong Si's corpse. Once the news spread and the people were dissatisfied, he could release Tong Si and let him face the truth. By then, the deal with the 5-star army would have been completed. What could they do? Thinking about it, he nodded and agreed. "All right, leave this matter to me. Esteemed ambassador, please wait for the good news." To be able to win this battle without shedding a drop of blood and seize a large portion of the territory, this was definitely a great contribution. With an excited heart, Ha Chun Wang entered the palace and met with Yi Li Chi. He told him everything that had happened. This discussion naturally caused Yi Li Chi to be overjoyed. He only needed to hand over one person to obtain the final victory. This made him very happy, especially when Ha Chun Wang thought about how he could casually find a corpse to deal with and reap the benefits. He didn't need to take any responsibility and didn't lose the dignity of a great nation. After Ha Chun Wang received the task, he immediately went to carry it out. He spent a lot of effort to get a tombstone and engraved Tong Si's name on it. After everything was settled, he personally went to the diplomatic mission's compound and invited Ma Dali, who had been trapped the moment he arrived, to the tombstone. He pointed at the tombstone and said, "This is Tong Si's tomb. To tell you the truth, he was defeated in the war. When he returned home, our king personally gave the order to execute him." Ma Dali sneered, then he said, "Great general, do you think that a tombstone can put an end to everything? I'm afraid there's no way to explain this." "You can open the coffin and examine the corpse," Ha Chun Wang said on his behalf. "Forget it. This person has been dead for longer than I have been in Bangkok, and the weather is so hot. What else can there be other than the rancid smell after opening the coffin?" After Ma Dali finished speaking, he flicked his sleeves and left. His voice echoed in the air, "Great general, since this is the case, our 5-star army will fight you on the battlefield even if we have to sacrifice ourselves." As a result, the peace talks were unable to proceed. Ha Chun Wang was a little disappointed, but he returned to his daily routine. After all, there was still good news coming from the front line. Even if the peace talks failed, they would still win this battle. It was just that more people would die. Right now, his greatest desire was to get rid of Hammond. If this person was still the prime minister, he was afraid that after the war, he would have to return to the barren lands of the western frontier. This was something he could not bear. Hammond was not idle either. He had been busy recruiting new soldiers. Although there were always reports of victory coming from the front lines, there was no harm in making more preparations since the battlefield could change at any time. Under Hammond's supervision, the recruitment of new soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner. The impeachment memorials continued to be placed in front of Hammond. Although there was a thorn in his heart, this famous monarch had no intention of touching Hammond. He had already thought about it. Even if he wanted to touch Hammond, he would have to wait until the war ended. Everything would be settled with an excuse to suppress it. Using the dying Tong Si as a bargaining chip to end the war was quickly forgotten. It was as if it had never happened. The reason why no one paid attention to this matter was because they believed that the army was winning steadily. There was no need for such methods. However, as the Siamese army on the eastern front line occupied more and more empty cities and territories, they had no choice but to divide their forces to defend the cities. The Siamese army, which originally consisted of 50,000 people, finally showed signs of being scattered. Attack! The five-star army, who had been waiting for an opportunity, saw the effect of luring the enemy deep into the enemy's territory. They decisively launched a fierce counterattack. More new soldiers entered the battlefield. Apart from the corpses left on the battlefield, those who walked out were qualified soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles. Yang Chendong's decision was to eliminate the enemy's strength. He did not care about the gains or losses of a single city or territory. Following this principle, the five-star army used multiple attacks to launch a full-scale counterattack against the 250,000 Siamese soldiers who had entered Cambodia. In order to achieve the goal of using war to train the soldiers, the young men from all over the country rushed in at once. They formed a unit of 5,000 people and launched a planned and intensive counterattack against the Siamese soldiers. After half a month, nearly 100,000 of the 300,000 people died. The number of injured reached 100,000. However, in the end, around 70,000 qualified soldiers were harvested. The attack of 300,000 people killed nearly 100,000 Siamese soldiers, greatly slowing down the enemy's offensive. Then, the third batch of young men arrived. Another 200,000 people entered the battlefield. 10 days later, more than 50,000 people died and more than 100,000 were injured. The number of soldiers who had experienced hundreds of battles was 50,000. In the third battle, more than 80,000 people were killed or injured. The East Siamese army still had about 70,000 people. At this point, the lack of manpower had become obvious. They had completely lost the initiative on the battlefield. Urgent letters for help were sent to the capital, Manga City. The five-star army of the East Siamese army had sent out about 560,000 new soldiers. Nearly 200,000 people died and more than 200,000 were injured. In the end, the number of qualified soldiers was 125,000. Perhaps they were not the best, especially the 50,000 people who came later. When they faced the Siamese army, their opponents were no longer at their peak. However, they had all experienced battles on the battlefield and had seen blood. They had a certain level of self-defense and killing ability. Give the order. 125,000 people will be divided into 13 units. We will launch a counterattack. We need better soldiers. Faced with hundreds of thousands of casualties, Yang Chendong said with a pained expression. However, they were of a different race. The deaths of these people were not as painful as the deaths of the 4,854 Lung Feng and He Wei soldiers. With the order, the counterattack began. In the face of the veterans' counterattack, the Siamese army, which had been badly beaten, finally showed signs of weakness. Not only did they quickly abandon the captured cities, but even when they retreated back to the borders of Siam, the five-star army did not stop. They continued to attack them. Shatu City fell. The loss of Shatu City, an important city at the eastern border, meant that the Siamese army had changed from an all-out attack to an all-out retreat. It also meant that the five-star army had begun to gain the initiative on the battlefield. The loss of Shatu City caused an earthquake in Bangkok. When King Yi Liqui heard the news, he almost fainted. Then, he summoned all the officials for a meeting. All the officials were woken up in the middle of the night and gathered in the palace. The news of the fall of Shatu City was personally reported by Eliqui. All the officials were terrified. Alright, everyone is here. Let's talk about what to do next. At this moment, Eliqui's face no longer showed any signs of panic. However, it was undeniable that his expression was extremely ugly. Even with his ability to calm himself down, he was already panicking. If the king was like this, the other officials were even more so. Everyone was panicking and did not dare to raise their heads. The 250,000 soldiers were defeated just like that. Now, there was less than a third of them left. Furthermore, the 5-star army had entered the border. How could they turn the situation around? Seeing that no one was speaking, Eliqui could only ask, "Minister, how is the recruitment going?" "Your Majesty, the recruitment is still ongoing. Currently, there are 100,000 new soldiers entering the camp. However, they have not undergone any training. If they are forced onto the battlefield, I am afraid that most of them will not be able to withstand a single blow. They will not be of any use." Hammond raised his head and said hesitantly. He was really worried that the king would send out these 100,000 soldiers in a moment of desperation. If that was the case, it would be the same as sending these people to their deaths. Fortunately, Eliqui was not muddle-headed. He only shook his head and expressed his disappointment. If it was any other time, Eliqui's performance would have caused Chun Hong to jump out and kick Hammond while he was down. However, he lowered his head and remained silent. He suddenly thought of Ma Dali and what he had told him about General Tong. Previously, they had considered Siam's reputation and the fact that their army had always held the initiative on the battlefield. Hence, they did not agree to hand over the people. But now, in the face of such an unfavorable situation, he had no choice but to disregard his reputation. "Your Majesty, I have something to say. I don't know if I should say it." Seeing that the court had fallen into silence again, Chun Hong spoke up. It was rare for someone to take the initiative to speak at this time. The high and mighty Eliqui simply spat out a word, "Speak." After receiving permission, Chun Hong looked at the throne and said without blinking, "Your Majesty, do you still remember the envoy from the 5-star army? He said that as long as we hand over General Tong, they will withdraw their troops and even compensate us. Of course, today is different from the past. Let's not think about compensation. However, if they can retreat, we will have enough time to train a new army and hope to rise again." Chapter 1047. Chun Hong had just opened his mouth when Prime Minister Hamad's voice rang out. "That's impossible. Tong Si is a general of Siam. If we hand him over just like that, where will our dignity go? If we do that, how will the people view us?" Hamad was a capable prime minister. Siam was able to enter the era of prosperity because of King Yi Li's wisdom. However, it had a lot to do with Hamad as the prime minister. Usually, people like him were very proud. Now that someone wanted to trample on his pride, how could he agree? As if he had expected Hammond to object, Chun Hong quickly turned around and looked at him. "What's wrong? Does the Prime Minister value his reputation so much? Is reputation more important or the strength and safety of Siam more important?" Of course they're all important. Although the situation in the East isn't looking good, we still have 100,000 veterans. Under their lead, the 200,000 new recruits might be able to make a difference. Just like the 5-star army, aren't they also made up of new recruits? Hammond naturally wasn't afraid of anyone when it came to eloquence. Is that so? What if these 300,000 soldiers lose the war? Prime Minister, what will happen to Siam? Who will protect the safety of the royal city? Chun Hong wasn't a pushover either. He had already prepared for this problem. He had even prepared for what Hamad would say. In the court, the two ministers actually quarreled openly. This made Eli, who was already in a bad mood, even more unsightly. When the country was in danger, why couldn't these people sit down and talk calmly? Would there be a good ending to a quarrel between ministers? In a fit of anger, Eli immediately showed his might and said angrily, "Enough, this isn't a small street. You aren't the lowest class of commoners. Shut up." Since the king was angry, the two naturally ended their quarrel. They both took a few steps back and returned to their positions. At this time, Ili's voice rang out. Dignity is the foundation of a country. Of course we want it. Hamad heaved a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the king would believe Chen Chuanwang's words. If that was the case, how could a dynasty without dignity and bottom line be trusted? Unfortunately, this relief didn't last for even a breath of time. Ili's voice rang out again. But for the safety of the country, so what if we bow our heads this time? Don't the Han people always say that a great man knows when to yield and when not? Then we will bow our heads this time. As long as it's for the sake of Siam's future. Let's leave this matter to the general. Go see the ambassador from the 5-star army and ask him if the previous promise is still valid. They all said, but, and there was nothing good after that. Now that it had been confirmed, Minister Hammond felt a chill in his heart as he urged, Your Majesty, you mustn't. You mustn't open your mouth. Otherwise, the hearts of the people will truly be unable to unite. That would truly be the most terrifying thing. Enough. Without waiting for Hamad to finish speaking, Ili waved his hand and said, Prime Minister, you should worry more about the new army. How to quickly let them have a certain amount of fighting power is far more practical than talking about righteousness in court. The Prime Minister was the Prime Minister of a country. He was an existence that was second only to the king and above tens of thousands. Many times, the Prime Minister or Prime Minister had a lot of control over the imperial power. They could even control the emperor, the king, the monarch, and everything that they could see. As the supreme leader of the imperial power, how could he be happy? It wasn't easy to conquer the country, but in the end, most of the power was given to the Prime Minister. What was the meaning of this? In the end, he was just a high-ranking employee. How could he dare to control the boss? Because of this, in the early days of the Great Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang spent a lot of effort to abolish the Prime Minister system. In the end, he concentrated power on himself. Although his workload increased, he was still happy. The Great Ming Dynasty no longer had a Prime Minister system, but Siam still had one. Moreover, Hammond was indeed a very honest person. He had a lot of autonomy in certain matters, and even the king had to act according to his mood in certain matters. The reason for such a situation was none other than the fact that this person was very capable and could help him in many things. This made him willingly give up power for his own benefit. But now, Hamad's actions were very different from his own. It already involved the safety of the country. He finally couldn't bear it anymore. In addition, Chen Hong had contacted so many people to impeach Hamad. At this moment, all of his anger exploded and he told Ili to shut up. Ever since Siam became a powerful city, Ili Qi had never spoken to him so forcefully. At this moment, Hamad was stunned. He realized that he didn't completely understand the king. Chen Hong saw that Ili was deflated and was very happy. He immediately cupped his fist and said, This subject obeys your Majesty's orders. Please listen to this subject's good news. Hamad was actually scolded in court. This was the first time this had happened. At this moment, the other courtiers who were originally flattering him began to deliberately distance themselves from him. Perhaps this was the true nature of human nature. There would always be more people who hit a man when he was down, and fewer people who helped him when he was down. Ili Qi walked out of the palace alone. Compared to his colleagues who took the initiative to distance themselves from him, this didn't make him sad. It was nothing more than showing him the cold and warm side of human nature. What really made him sad was the king's attitude and the other subjects' speechlessness. He couldn't imagine a country that didn't even have dignity. What kind of future could they talk about? Chen Hong, on the other hand, went to the diplomatic group's compound with a face full of joy. When he talked about Tong Si, Ma Dali's face was still filled with determination. That's right. As long as you hand over Tong Si for us to deal with, the 5-star army will retreat and discuss compensation with you. Esteemed envoy, you are too polite. What compensation? We are all neighboring countries, so we should get along well with each other. How about this? I will go ask His Majesty to bring Tong Si over for you to deal with. At this moment, Ha Chunwang didn't dare to talk about compensation. In his opinion, If the five-star army could retreat immediately, he could accept some compensation. However, he didn't know that Ma Dali already knew that Tong Si had been taken away by the intelligence department. This promise was impossible to fulfill. Under such conditions, he could say anything he wanted. Ha Chunwang met the king for the sake of profit. Soon, he received a decree and went straight to the death row prison. Here, he interrogated Tong Si, who was imprisoned and awaiting death. Then, he was surprised to find that the person he saw wasn't Tong Si at all, but someone he had never seen before. "What's going on? What's going on?" Ha Chunwang roared as he called the jailer over and asked like a madman. "I don't know. This person was sent here by the Prime Minister. As for who he is, we don't know." The jailers sold out the Prime Minister in order to cut ties. Hearing that it was all Hammond's doing, Chun Huang's face revealed a sinister expression. He turned around and went back to the palace. In the palace, Li Qi had placed all his hopes on handing over Tong Si. Suddenly, Ha Chunwang reported that the person in the death row prison wasn't Tong Si, but someone else. Li Qi immediately sat on the throne and was speechless for a long time. The situation had changed too quickly. It was so fast that he couldn't react in time. How did Tong Si disappear? "Your Majesty, it must be Hammond's doing. I said before that this person is suspected of being in cahoots with the five-star army." With this opportunity, Chun Hong obviously wanted to add insult to injury. This isn't possible." Li Qi shook his head. He still didn't believe it. That was the Prime Minister he personally conferred. How could he betray him? "Your Majesty, regardless of whether it is true or not, I will know once I capture him and interrogate him. However, the Prime Minister has always been very cunning. I'm afraid we won't be able to get anything out of him using normal methods. We can only be a little more ruthless. Your Majesty, please agree." Ha Chunwang clenched his teeth and said. Li Qi had no choice but to agree. He understood Hammond very well. If this was really his doing, it would be impossible to calmly interrogate him about Tong Si's whereabouts. As such, he could only use some special methods. At the Prime Minister's residence, a group of Siamese soldiers suddenly appeared and took Hammond away without any warning. Ha Chunwang had never wanted to keep a low profile. He even wanted to use this matter to strike a blow. Many people saw the Prime Minister's prestige during the arrest. Not long after, a rumor spread through the streets that the Siamese army had admitted defeat to the five-star army. They had decided to compromise and betray their dignity by giving their general Tong Si to the five-star army to curry favor. It was precisely because the Prime Minister did not agree with this suggestion that he was captured. The news was naturally spread by Qingzi, a CIA intelligence agent who had been staying in the city. All of this was Yang Chendong's orders. In his opinion, there was no crisis that had a greater impact than a civil strife. Wasn't it said that even the strongest fortress was afraid of being breached from the inside? Hammond's arrest naturally caused chaos in the royal capital. When Li Qi learned of this matter, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He hated Ha Chunwang for not knowing his limits. Why did he have to be so brazen when arresting someone? He hated those who spread the news. Wasn't this destroying his own foundation? Chapter 1048. However, everything was already a fact. Since his request for the five-star army to negotiate had already been made public, there was no need for him to hide anymore. He just needed to find Tong Si and hand him over to resolve this crisis. Speaking of Li Qi, he had underestimated the position of the Prime Minister in the hearts of the people. This Prime Minister had the reputation of loving the people like his own children. In addition, with the CIA secretly adding fuel to the fire, it didn't take long before voices of support for Hamad appeared in Bangkok. These voices grew louder and louder. There were even groups of people who went to the various government offices and the palace to petition. The general idea was that they refused to lower their heads and wanted the Prime Minister to be returned to them. The sudden appearance of this unexpected wave and the number of people who participated increased. Li Qi was finally a little afraid. He wasn't afraid that the people would do anything to threaten him. In his view, as long as he mobilized the army, The people were an existence that could be suppressed at will. He was afraid that the prime minister's influence was so great. Fortunately, he had been captured. If he had waited for the prime minister to make the first move, with this person's rallying power, it would be hard to say if he would be able to keep his throne. The people's petition not only failed to save the prime minister, but it also made the king even more worried. There was no other way. It was always a taboo for the king to be too powerful. It could be seen that even if Hamad survived this crisis, he wouldn't be put in an important position after he was released. On the front line of the East Army, Yang Chendong led the Lu 5th Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army. They slowly followed behind the hundreds of thousands of veterans. Step by step, they moved towards the inner borders of Siam and towards Bangkok. Siam wasn't like the other countries and regions that had been conquered before. It was at the peak of the era of big cities. Whether it was the morale of the army or the people, it could be used greatly. It truly had the foundation to contend against the 5-star army. If Yang Chendong had not changed his strategy at the critical moment, it would have been difficult for him to defeat the Siamese army, which was large in number and high in morale. Even now, after the war, Yang Chendong had hundreds of thousands of veterans under his command. However, he still dared not say that he could conquer Siam like he did with the other countries. After all, the hearts of the people were leaning towards benefits. This could be seen from the way the people looked at the army wherever they went. Regarding this, Yang Chendong felt wronged. So, it's natural for the Siamese army to attack Cambodia. Is it an invasion when we retaliate? Why is there always a double standard? Faced with the resistance of the local people, any other person would have to consider whether to sit down and negotiate for benefits. Just like the Japanese army that invaded China, when faced with the resistance of the Chinese people, they could only use the slogan of mutual prosperity to manage the situation. They would never dare to use force to suppress the Chinese people. However, when it came to Yang Chendong, he had already made up his mind. He remembered the words of a great man, "You should chase after the enemy with courage. Don't learn from the overlord for the sake of fame." The Siamese army could suddenly attack this time. If they let it go, who could guarantee that they would not attack again? He was no longer the one nation of the past. He had already occupied several provinces, especially the newly built Far Eastern province. It was a vast land with abundant resources, and it needed a large number of people to fill it. At most, he could just emigrate the people there. In short, this time, he was ready to destroy Siam, even if he had to pay a high price for it. He had already ordered the governor of Chigang City, as well as the other provinces, to immediately prepare for the migration of the people. In fact, Cambodia, as the nearest province, had already done so. Every time the 5-star army occupied a city or a place, they would arrange for these people to settle down there. As for the natives who were originally here, they would be taken away and sent to other provinces and places like the Far Eastern continent on ships. Yang Chendong's plan was to nibble away at Siam, step by step, including every inch of land and every single person in the country. Because of this, the speed of the army was very slow. Even so, it was already October, and the army led by Yang Chendong was less than 300 miles away from Bangkok. More than half a year had passed. This war could be said to be long. It took at least 31 days to defeat the Phnom Penh dynasty and conquer it. In the matter of Siam, he was determined to put in a lot of effort. Manpower, material resources, and financial resources had also been paid correspondingly. The direct result was that Lord Yu Qian and the other provincial heads couldn't help but complain. Fortunately, Yang Chendong said that there would be no move to destroy the country in a short time, and they would be given some time to develop, which blocked the leisurely mouths of the masses. In the end, the lack of population and the lack of resources was a big problem. Yang Xie's development time was too short, and the speed of expanding the territory was too fast. This was the so-called pain and happiness. Compared to the 5-star army, the nobles in Bangkok had long been in a mess. The loss of the peripheral towns one after another was like a giant beast opening its mouth, giving them a gloomy and terrifying feeling. No one liked war. Even if there were some who liked it due to various reasons, they definitely did not like the feeling of being attacked at their doorstep. Facing the defeat of the East Army, especially the news from the North Army, even though the commander there was Siam's rank 1 General Gordon, who was also the best at fighting, it was useless. In the face of the endless stream of men under Yang Xie's influence, their military strength was no longer at an advantage. On the contrary, they were at a disadvantage. In such an environment, no one could hold on for too long. In the palace, Siam's king Ili Chi was finally impatient. He called Chun Hong over and asked, "He still hasn't told us where he hid Tong Si?" "No, he only said that he doesn't know." Chun Hong carefully raised his head. There was no other way. He was a little guilty. Originally, he thought that after capturing Hammond he would only need to use a few tricks to get him to confess everything. However, there would always be someone who was stubborn, and he happened to meet him. 20 days had already passed, and there was still no progress. He didn't even get a single word of confession. All he got was the contemptuous sneer in the other party's eyes. Hearing that Xiang still hadn't confessed anything, King Ili Chi said angrily, "What does he want? Does he want to see Siam destroyed?" "Your Majesty!" Chun Hong comforted the king when he saw how angry the king was. At the same time, he suggested in a low voice, "Your Majesty, it seems like it's impossible for him to say anything. Should we make other preparations?" "Other preparations? Let's hear them." Knowing that there was a hidden meaning in his words, Li Chi looked like he wanted to try. Ahem. Chun Hong coughed lightly to show his awkwardness. He then said, "Why don't we find someone who looks like Tong Si and hand him over to the 5-star army? Maybe we can get away with it." "An imposter?" When he saw Chun Huang's unnatural expression, Li Kui knew that Chun Hong wouldn't have any good ideas. Now that he heard this, his face showed an expression of, as expected. If it was in the past, he definitely wouldn't have agreed. But now he was speechless. Should he reprimand her? Indeed, this move was quite despicable, especially when it involved the war between two countries. It was even more of a joke. If it was in the past, he would never have used it. But what should he do now? Seeing that the 5-star army was winning every step of the way, Siam's crisis was getting bigger and bigger. If they didn't think of a solution soon, they might really be in danger of being destroyed. At such a time of crisis, all kinds of tricks could be used. "How confident are you?" Instead of objecting, he asked about the feasibility of the matter. Chun Hong raised his head in surprise. When he saw Li Kui's serious face, he knew that there was a chance of success. He immediately replied, "It shouldn't be difficult to find someone who looks like Tong Si. It's just like how we look at the Han people. I think they look the same to us. So, I'm 70% confident. 70% is not low." Li Kui pondered for a moment and said. Then, as if he thought of something, he said, "Do it carefully. If it doesn't work, remember that it's your own problem. It has nothing to do with me or Siam." Chun Hong nodded repeatedly. This result was already within his expectations, but he didn't find it strange. It was not because of other reasons. This was originally a very dirty matter. If something really went wrong, someone had to be the scapegoat. Chun Hong left. He had already found a replacement. After promising Li Kui's family a lot of benefits, he deliberately made him look very disheveled. This was to make people not want to see him. This would increase the probability of success. After everything was done, Chun Hong appeared in the diplomatic mission's courtyard. Tong Si was brought in. When Ma Dali heard the news, he was shocked at first. Then he laughed softly. He had already thought of Siam's plan. After all, if he were to put himself in their shoes, this might be the only solution. He pretended to be very happy as he walked out of the room. Then he saw Chun Hong close by with a flattering smile on his face. Speaking of which, this person wasn't like this a month ago. Following the 5-star army's successive victories in the war, this person's noble head finally lowered. Ma Dali, who was well aware of all this, maintained his usual smile. He still needed Chun Hong to put on a show. He couldn't ruin their relationship. Chapter 1049. General Chun is here. My apologies for not going out to meet you. Ma Dali pretended to be very happy and took the initiative to greet him. Chun Hong was also full of smiles. When he saw Ma Dali, he pretended to be mysterious and said, "Minister Ma, look who I have brought." This was the first time Chun Hong had addressed Ma Dali by his official position. Just from this point alone, it was clear that their intelligence department had done something. Ma Dali himself was not surprised by this title. From the day he entered Bangkok, he had already disregarded his life and death. With the five-star army's continuous victories, he knew that he would not die unless the higher-ups of Siam had lost their minds. Unless they wanted to die together with him, saving his life was equivalent to saving their lives. "Oh, I wonder what good news General Chun has brought?" Ma Dali asked without changing his expression. Chun Hong secretly admired Ma Dali's ability to maintain his composure. He went straight to the point. "Come, bring him here." "He is Tong Si?" "Yes. He is indeed tall and mighty." "Ha, General Chun is very considerate. I will immediately send someone to report this matter to the higher-ups. If there are no accidents, the war should stop now." After the fake Tong Si was brought out, there was a simple conversation. Then, Ma Dali made a promise. Chun Hong was naturally overjoyed. While nodding, he almost urged Ma Dali to write a letter quickly. Ma Dali was a man of his word. He quickly wrote a letter and handed it to his trusted subordinates. Under the protection of Chun Huang's men, he left the city. For days later, the news of a ceasefire came from the front line. This caused all the officials and nobles in Bangkok to celebrate. The war was finally going to stop. They did not have to worry about their lives and the safety of their property. How could they know that the reason why the five-star army had stopped their attack was because they were preparing for the next step of the attack? Ma Dali had already sent a telegram to inform the higher-ups of the situation. Fortunately, he brought enough spare batteries with him when he went out this time. Otherwise, he might not be able to hold on with such frequent power supply. Yang Chendong knew that the other party had used impersonation to create a fake General Tong, so he decided to beat them at their own game. He wanted to use this to weaken the morale of Siam's resistance. Compared to their previous opponents, Siam could only be described as powerful. At the very least, this country had just passed the period of being a major city. It was the time when the country was strong and the people were rich. The people were very confident in the country. This would definitely increase the difficulty of their attack. It wasn't impossible to use brute force to suppress them, but it would come at a great price. On the other hand, if they could make the other party self-destruct, then the effect would be much better. Impersonating Tong Si was one of the methods to disintegrate the enemy. Yang Chendong had already thought about how to make use of this matter. However, he was 300 miles away, and many things were beyond his reach. Everything depended on the cooperation between Ma Dali and the CIA. As for himself, this was a good opportunity to reorganize the military's morale and prepare for a bigger war. Being able to defeat Siam was completely different from dealing with other small countries in the past. In the past, the strategy was to gather the elite forces and force a breakthrough, catching the other party off guard. Then the main force would charge straight in. Before the other party could react, everything would be over. In the battle with Siam, they were the ones who took the initiative. They were in a passive position. In addition, the other party was already prepared. It was impossible to use the old strategy. That was why the war lasted for such a long time. Roughly calculating, Xianxia's side had invested millions of new recruits in the north and east. The number of people who invested in the use of resources was even more, reaching more than 2 million. It was really not easy to achieve the current success with such a large amount of manpower and financial resources. However, this was not the end. If they blindly used brute force against Siam, who knew how much money and how many lives they would have to sacrifice to establish a complete victory here? After thinking about it, it was better to use the method of internal disintegration. The war supplies at the rear were continuously transported from Cheng City to Cambodia. Then, they were transported by the people all the way to the army. There were dozens of carriages of ammunition. After more than 2 months of rest, The Lu 5th Division was ready to show their strong side again. The immigrants sent by the provinces were also in place. There were more than 1 million people. Now, they were only waiting for Yang Chendong to give the order to launch the final attack. When the signal of internal strife came from Bangkok, it was time for them to march forward and conquer Bangkok in one fell swoop. It was time to end Yaliki's rule, the capital of Siam. The battle at the front had finally stopped. It was as if a boulder had been lifted from their chests. Everyone could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. As the chief contributor, Ha Chuanwang's face was full of joy. He had received accurate information from King Yaliki. From now on, he did not need to go to Shijiang. When the war was over, he could stay in the capital and enjoy life. This was the result he had been searching for. Naturally, he was overjoyed. His face was full of joy. When he heard that Minister Ma Dali wanted to see him, he did not dare to be negligent. He would not forget the reason why he was valued by the king. Ma Dali was a god that he could not afford to offend. In the diplomatic mission's courtyard, Chun Hong hurried over. When he saw Ma Dali, he heard a question that made him feel awkward, but he couldn't avoid it. It was the other party's suggestion to escort Tong Si out of the royal capital and send him to the front lines of the 5-Star Army. He also said that this was the will of the 5-Star Army. Only then, the 5-Star Army would sit down and negotiate. General Chun, this is the will of the higher-ups. I have to obey. Of course, I'll stay behind. If nothing unexpected happens, I'll still be in charge of the peace talks. With our relationship, I'll do my best to take care of you. Ma Dali acted as if he didn't want to, but he had no choice. He even spoke in a comforting tone. Chun Hong understood Ma Dali's words. He also understood that this was a way for the 5-Star Army to show off their victory. However, since things had come to this, he could not refuse or stop it. Although doing so would greatly affect the morale of the Siamese soldiers, if he did not do so, would he really have to fight to the death against the aggressive 5-Star Army? I understand Minister Ma's intention. However, this is a serious matter. We need the king's permission. Chun Hong thought for a moment before giving an answer. Yes, but it must be fast. The higher-ups said that if they do not see Tong in person within 5 days, the attack will continue. By then, even I will be helpless. Ma Dali did not care whether Chun Hong was trying to delay or not. He expressed his attitude first. When he heard that there were only 5 days, Chun Hong became anxious. Minister Ma, the distance from here to your camp is 300 miles. 5 days? It's okay. The 5-Star Army will be there to welcome you. When the time comes, I will need your help. Ma Dali was prepared for this. Chun Hong could not do anything. He could only say that he would immediately explain the situation to the king and give him an answer. After leaving the courtyard, he went to the palace. When the king heard about this, he did not say anything. After a moment of silence, he stood up and left his seat. Not saying anything often represented a kind of tacit agreement. After Chun Hong received the order, he returned to the courtyard to express the king's agreement. In order to send Tong to the 5-Star Army's camp on time, he even urged Ma Dali to send Tong out of the city at night. It was not far from dark. Chun Huang's plan was to send Tong out of the city at night so that the impact would be minimized. Ma Dali would not let him do as he wished. He said that it was getting late and he needed to rest. He would arrange for people to leave the city the next morning. At this time, Ma Dali was obviously the winner. Since he said so, regardless of whether Chun Hong liked it or not, he could only accept it. Fortunately, he had one night to prepare. He had already decided to seal off the streets the next morning. In short, he would not allow anyone to see this scene that represented the shame of Siam. He had a good idea. When he was about to leave, Ma Dali broke his dream. "Oh right, General Chun, our leader said that when we send Tong out of the city, we must make some noise. The 5-Star Army cares about our reputation. You started this war. If you do something wrong, you have to admit it." Chun Hong felt bitter, but he had to agree. After leaving the compound, he immediately sent people to transfer over a large number of soldiers to guard the streets. In short, it was to avoid any trouble as much as possible. Some things could not be changed by one's will. Yang Chendong had already planned this. When Tong Si was taken away from the dungeon, some things had already been decided. How could there not be any trouble? If that was the case, how could the morale of the soldiers and the people be affected? The next morning, Chun Hong came to the courtyard. It was obvious that his eyes were red. It was obvious that he had not slept the whole night. Ma Dali did not point it out. Instead, he took out the prison carriage that he had prepared. It was a carriage made of wood, and the fake Tong was locked in it. Furthermore, it was cleaned up very neatly. Not only was the dirt and dust on his face washed clean, but he was also dressed in armor and dressed like a general. Looking at this scene, Chun Hong did not know why, but he had an ominous feeling. However, since things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet. He only hoped that the people did not know what was going on. Even if they knew, they would not care. Reality slapped him in the face again. The CIA had spread the news early in the morning that Siam had admitted defeat. In order to appease the anger of the five-star army, they took the initiative to send General Tong to the enemy to show their sincerity. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.